that's 9 o'clock, so we will open the meeting. So the first item on the agenda is welcome and apologies. So I'd like to welcome committee members, authority staff, Police Scotland colleagues and HMICS colleagues. And I'd also like to extend a special welcome to Nerys Thomas from the College of Policing, who will present a paper shortly on today's agenda. I do not have any member apologies today. However, Councillor Maureen Chalmers, who attends and participates in our meetings, has tendered apologies for today's meeting, and we look forward to welcoming her to the June committee, at which she will present an update report on key areas of COSLA's work of interest to the committee, and which will focus on strategic developments and cross-COSLA activity that links to policing. And finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to mention that this will be the last committee meeting for Michelle Miller, who will step down from the board at the end of April. Michelle is not only a member of this committee, but has been a member of the Performance Committee in its previous forms too. Michelle has played a key role in driving improvement of both the authority's oversight of policing and in policing itself. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to Michelle for her commitment to the work of this committee, and wish her all the very best for the future. Okay, moving on to section 1.2, which is declarations of interest and connections. Does anybody have any interest or connections that in relation to today's agenda items that they would like to declare now? No? So we're all good. Okay, 1.3, this is for approval, and it's a public minute from the 6th of December. So you've all seen the draft minute from that date, and I'd ask members to approve that. Yep, okay, thank you again. We now move on to the PPC action log and matters arising. There's 16 items there, 10 which are due to close. Just a little comment on that. As members of this committee, we've received a number of briefing notes, and thanks to all the staff that have done the work behind the scenes to make sure that we are in a position to close these actions today. But what we want to do is make sure that we are very open and transparent in this. So we will be providing links to relevant briefings so that if anybody wants to understand why we're closing certain items and the progress that has been made, that will be made available. So looking to members now, is there any questions on the action log and matters arising, and are you content to close and leave open the ones that are being left open today? Okay, thank you for that. So moving on to section 2 now, but just before I move into this, we've got a very busy agenda today, and we will be finishing at 12:30. Please, those that are presenting the papers, take as read that we have read the papers, highlight the areas that you feel are appropriate to highlight and to draw out, and leave appropriate time for discussion and questions. So with that, 2.1, which is the quarterly policing performance report for Q3, and I see that we have Tom McMahon, Director of Strategy and Analysis, who's going to speak to this paper. So over to yourself, Tom.
Chair, thank you very much. Okay, so very briefly going through the Q3 report for the current year. This covers the period October to December of 2023. We've continued, as agreed, with the existing performance framework. As SPA members know, we're in a transitional period moving towards a different approach, more heavily data-driven and so on, and we'll be talking to members next week about that. and that work is on track, and we're grateful for the support we've had from SPA colleagues in that regard. Today's report, we hope, fulfills expectations on the SPA side. There is more disaggregation of data. The areas I would draw out for particular note are around serious assaults on officers and staff. These increased based on the Q3 data against last year and the 5-year mean. There was an increase of 13 serious assaults on officers and staff compared to the previous year, and there was also an increase of 13 compared to the 5-year mean. So by using a 12-month rolling average, there are between 2 and 4 serious assaults on officers and staff per month. Overall, violent crime, based on the data, has increased by 4.4% from the same period in the previous year, and 4.7% compared to the 5-year mean. Robberies and common assault continue to be the drivers of the increase in violent crime, and we've spoken at this committee in previous meetings over the course of this reporting year about that. That trend continues. Common assaults increased 4.2% on last year and 5.4% compared to the 5-year picture. And in sexual crime, that increased during the reporting period, and it was up by 3.1%. Now, we've talked in previous meetings about the action that we're taking around violence against women and girls based on the strategy, the work that we do to tackle online sexual crime and child sexual exploitation. Equally, particular focus on improving rape detection rates. The reported crimes of rape decreased during the reporting period. They were down by 0.1%. which equates to 2 crimes compared to the same period in the previous year. Looking at the call response, there's data, as you would expect, within the report around 999 calls that were answered in under 10 seconds, benchmarked against UK figures. And we'll come on to speak about benchmarking, and that's a commitment that we've made. In terms of the volume, these increased by 14.5% on the same period last year. The last element that I would draw particular attention to is around acquisitive crime, which has a high profile and has had a high profile in discussions that we've had previously. That has continued to increase based on the Q3 data compared to the same period in the previous year, and it's 12% higher than the 5-year mean. In terms of repeat offenders around acquisitive crime, that's up on last year, and housebreakings, shoplifting and theft of motor vehicle crimes are what lies underneath that. So, as you said, Chair, members have had the opportunity to read the report. Our commitment is improved transparency, disaggregation of data, as you've asked for, and we've included that within there, and hopefully to produce a report that's accessible and engaging. Happy to take any questions on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that presentation. And before we open up to questions, just acknowledge and express my appreciation for this new streamlined report. That greater emphasis on exception reporting and delivering insights is something that's really welcome. And I know, as you mentioned, that there is further work to do, and that is in progress, and we're working to get together on that. So just acknowledge, the really positive progress that has been made. So with that, can I open it up to members? Are there any questions that you have for Tom at this point? Tom Halpin.
Thank you, Chair, and Tom and your team. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the progress that's been made in this report and it's the responsiveness towards requests that came from the committee and myself included in that. the insight is very, very helpful. There's a couple of wee points sort of broader in terms of policing. I don't know if you're in a position to answer them, but in terms of violence, it is really concerning, serious levels of serious assaults against officers and staff, and we should never take our focus off of that. It's not acceptable to be assaulted at your work. But in the broader issue of violence in Scotland, then the previous work of the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, how do we bring in that work into this performance report as well, so that we get a holistic picture of the work involved in tackling violence in Scotland?
Yes, thank you, Tom. I mean, my initial response is we can definitely do that, and the links between the VRU and the PPCW division within Police Scotland are really strong and have been strengthened over the last few years. If that's a feature of future reporting that would be valuable, I think it would be, given the direction of travel around violence and the elements within that. Then we can start to play that narrative in as well about what action is being taken. And I know that the VRU under new leadership as well are looking at their national footprint. So that's work that we would be supportive of. I'm not sure if there's any, perhaps Deb Spears wants to offer any comment on that at this point, but hopefully that covers it, Tom.
Yeah. I think that's also relevant. Although the numbers around antisocial behaviour show a decline, the experience of people in their communities is that it's still a significant issue for them. So that work of that engagement work of the police and units like the SRVU is important too.
Yeah, Tom, just to come back with the last point, Tina's confirmed to me that we have had a number of meetings with the VRU actually about how we can get access to their data and play it into this report. So that'll be a feature of reporting in the next reporting year, and we'll try and play some into Q4 as well, which covers the current period.
I'm really grateful for that, and the fact that you're already on it gives us a level of confidence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Mary Pitt-Caithley, and then I have Michelle Miller. So Mary.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the report, Tom. It's very interesting, and I do like the new format, so thank you very much for that. I think it's heading very much in the right direction. On page 22 of the report, there's information about drink and drug driving offences, where it would appear that there's been a fairly significant increase in the number of offences in the north and a smaller increase in the west, and detection rates are also up. I just wondered the extent to which we can put this down to increased activity by police in those areas looking for these offences, or whether we might think there is actually more drink and drug driving than there was before. So to what extent is this about more resource being deployed as against changes in behaviour?
Thanks, Mary. I think there is a strong element of proactivity on Police Scotland's side, but I was going to suggest that ACC Bond, if she's on the call, ACC for Local Policing North, could perhaps just give a reflection on that and some of the activity that's been undertaken.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Mary. It's a really good question, and I think one that actually probably the answer is that it's a combination of probably the two. Undoubtedly, we're trying our best to make sure that we're creating those opportunities for proactive policing activity. We rely obviously on potentially information coming in or reports from members of the public, enabled to allow us to target and focus our activity. So that's being undertaken, and then through some of the other work, particularly think that I'll touch on later, is how we'll free up some officer time or seek to make sure that we create the opportunity for proactive policing. Alongside then obviously responding. So I don't think it's necessarily one single factor. I think potentially we've still work to do with other partners around that deterrence message and around preventing issues in terms of drink and drug driving, but really encouraging that those who do seek to break the law obviously continue to be detected by our officers, and hopefully that acts in some way to an active deterrent to anybody who would be so inclined, because we do see on a very regular basis, unfortunately, still serious collisions on the roads, and fatality. So an area that we continue to focus on.
Yeah, although it's also helpful to note that the road safety figures are looking better than they were last year as well. So that's positive in terms of casualties anyway. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Michelle?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. And I too, I really appreciate the direction in which it's moving in terms of presentation. I think it really helps to be clearer about the information that's presented. So my question is less about the content per se or about performance, but more about the extent to which Police Scotland believes that both this format and the direction of travel in terms of presenting data and collecting data is helping in terms of targeting resources to priority areas. Because if it's not actually helping in a sense in terms of operational priorities, then it's pretty, but it doesn't really help Police Scotland very much. So to what extent do you think that it is helping, and that further changes to it in terms of improvements will help more than that? And secondly, could you give some examples perhaps about how this data is being used in order for Police Scotland to make decisions about resource prioritisation or resource allocation or any of the things that you would hope that a performance framework like this would help you to do?
Michelle, thank you very much for that question, and credit to yourself for the direction that you have pushed us in through this committee. With the arrival of the Chief Constable in the autumn of last year, she made it clear that our top three priorities were around trust, confidence and performance. And she also made clear that her expectation was that the way in which we reported, both publicly and internally, would be more about some of the themes that yourself and committee members had pushed us on around the disaggregation of data, around proper benchmarking, and around a straightforward as possible dashboard type approach to whether performance was improving or not. Context being important, but get the balance right between kind of qualitative text and explanations and some of the data. So what we've done with the development of the new performance framework, which I know is not on the agenda today, but we will speak about next week, is try to develop basically an approach that's based on enhanced accountability, but that's rooted in our values, based on integrity and fairness and respect. No repeat of behaviours of the past around how data was used or arguably drove poorer behaviours, but making sure that we've got our finger on the pulse of where the organisation needs to focus. And the Chief has emphasised that commitment to accountability, and that's both internally and in the public sphere, committees such as this. And we want that at local level as well. So the approach that we're rolling out, this Q3 report gives a flavour of it, but a much heavier reliance on dashboards and on trend analysis. But as you say, it's not just frankly to produce a prettier report that's shorter, it's to then inform the tasking decisions that we take. And as we've discussed with the committee before, we undertook the National Review of Tasking and Coordination last year. That work is progressing, and we're looking at an April go live for quite a different governance shape around how we do tasking at local, regional and national level. And to give you some assurance, we're baking performance into that. We expect when local tasking is undertaken that there is effort made to look at performance, to look at impact assessment, to have evaluation as a feature of that work, so that we can take stock of what impact we've had and what lessons need to be learned. And it's about being a learning organisation. So on specifics, the work we're doing on performance at the moment is central to the discussions that the Deps and Chief are having around new operating model and some of the thinking around basically our highest threat, harm and risk areas, and what does performance look like in that context. So that's a discussion that we'll be having with SPA colleagues over the months ahead to make sure that that operating model of the future is appropriate. But again, the Chief's emphasis on targeting highest threat, harm and risk and having a real handle on how performance looks and where we need to put resources, I hope gives you some reassurance that actually the whole system starts to join up properly. And that's what we've attempted to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That's really helpful.
So Katerina, I know that you had your hand up, but I see that DCC Beck Smith has put her hand up. Did you want to come in, Bex, to add to the response that Tom's just provided to Michelle there?
I didn't know if it was helpful just to bring in some operational context around where we're using the data to make difficult demand decisions. So I was going to give you a couple of examples, and really grateful to Tina and the team around developing the Violence Against Women and Girls dashboards, and using that performance data, we were able to see that there was an issue with the rape detection rate in G Division, which was dropping quite substantially. And actually using the data enabled us to understand the reasons why in a, as Tom talked about, a supportive way. And actually the work that we undertook using the data showed that we were submitting our reports to COPFS too early. And actually that meant that the rape detection rate was being impacted. So the work that we've done to kind of support that is to help officers around submission of the SPRs at the right point. And actually what we're seeing now is that cases are progressing effectively through the CJ system rather than being submitted too early. So although the detection rate has dropped, the reason for that is because we're doing it properly, is my sense. And then another example of that is in Ayrshire, we saw some really interesting improvements in detection performance around sexual offending. We were able to get underneath that using the data, and we could see that I had moved some resources across into that particular area to focus on historic sexual offending, and the impact that had was quite substantial in terms of detection performance. So I suppose my thought with that is we're not there yet, but we're able to look at the data to make sensible, intelligent decisions as to where we put resource to support our officers and staff. So those are just two small examples, but I thought it might help kind of in terms of the operational context, just to show where we're using the data to make those decisions.
Chair, could I just very briefly come back on that? Just to say that I think that's really helpful, and that's kind of exactly what we've been looking for so long, you know. So it is really, really encouraging to see it. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for your patience as well. Katerina, you have a question?
Yes, no, not at all, Chair. My question was substantially the same as Michelle has just asked. So actually, a big part of the answer I was seeking has just been provided, and me too. I really appreciate the just kind of the move into a real kind of data-driven decision making. So Bex, you know, I think the operation examples that you've just highlighted are really, really helpful to understand. Really good illustration of it kind of working in practice. So I just have got two really small kind of questions, but I think if I've got them, then, you know, maybe whoever's looking at the report will also have them. So again, just in terms of presentation of the data, I really appreciate this. I have to say, and I have missed, if it's explained somewhere and I've missed it, I do apologize, but Spark lines. I mean, I thought I had come across kind of most kind of data related jargon, but that's a new one to me to some degree. I think I can kind of know what this means, but I would really appreciate just a very brief explanation. What does it mean in this context? And also, again, just around the you make reference to statistical limits, upper limits, lower limits. And again, I think I know what they mean, but it would be really helpful to maybe understand how you have developed those. For example, you know, if I look at, you know, page 14, reported rape exceeds year-to-date statistical limits. So maybe just a very brief explanation around how those limits have been established.
Great. Chair, if I can come back to Katerina, thanks for the question. Spark lines, the first time we've included them within this, we're experimenting with new ways of presenting data in the most accessible way possible, and it's basically a feature of some of the new software that we've got that we can produce that. If it's useful and if it opens up the discussion, then great, but equally we're ready for feedback if it's actually creating more questions. In terms of the confidence and control limits, I was going to suggest that maybe Tina McLucas could just give you more of a technical description of how we come up with that, but it's making sure that the reporting obviously is focused on areas where we're starting to move outside of that space. Tina?
Thanks, Tom. Absolutely. And in terms of the statistical control limits, we've used them for quite some time internally in our own teams to identify exceptions. So really, it provides that upper and lower confidence limit. And our statisticians define that by looking at 5-year average, looking at seasonality, standard deviation. So that's all sort of baked into the calculation, which I'm more than happy to share in terms of how that's defined and how the detail of that. But essentially all that comes together to create what we'd call an upper and lower limit. We do recognise though, even with all of that, we're still got the COVID impact. So we try to contextualise that as and where we can and as and where appropriate, just to give that rounded approach. And the idea behind that is we don't want to knee-jerk react to, you know, maybe like spikes in data that are within those limits. So the new performance approach that we're taking within the organisation and the tasking process is really those exceptions that are above those limits or even below, where we might see areas of best practice and learning, but equally it's really just a starting point, and it allows us to ask that question, well, what's happening here with the data? And that's where the analysis of then kick in and looking for that local context and those performance conversations. The Sparkline piece was really just looking at the data across the months from this being July to December, and looking at, you know, really just to show, well, where has the kind of biggest increase been on that month. So it's just a slightly different way of presenting the data. But again, happy to take any feedback on that as this product develops further.
Chair, can I come in? Just to respond. Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Tina. Really, as I say, really appreciate this time. So I think the Sparklines are helpful, and I think again, the upper and lower confidence limits absolutely make sense to me. This is kind of the direction in which I've been trying to drive some of the data presentation, for example, into complaints and conduct committee as well. I'm just mindful that, you know, this report will also be read by people who don't necessarily have that kind of statistical outlook. So I think what you've just explained, you know, that it isn't setting some arbitrary limits, but it is based in data and, you know, takes things such as seasonality into account, etc. I think it's just really helpful, you know, because I think as a member of the public, you might see something like a limit and you kind of go like, how can you place a limit on this or on that, you know? So I think, you know, it's just with that kind of, you know, the public perception perspective, I think it's really good to kind of show some of the kind of thinking behind some of these terms that are being used. But as I say, I really welcome that. I think to me, it definitely makes sense, and it makes the presentation of the data much more robust. So thank you for that.
Okay, any further questions from members? Okay, I've got one very specific question and a couple of broad points to make. You mentioned rightly, Tom, the increase in proportion of treble 9 calls that are being answered within that national benchmark of 10 seconds. But I also note in the report that there's been an increase of 1 minute 47 seconds, taken up to, I think, 6 minutes and 4 seconds for the 101 calls. Is that because there's a trade-off in there in terms of capacity? You know, what's driving that you know, change? Because it can feel over 6 minutes if you're waiting on somebody to answer a phone for something that's really important to you. That can feel like a very long time. So maybe just some commentary around that.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. There is a trade-off, but the best person to speak to that is ACC Bond, who's their lead on C3. Emma, would you be able to come in? Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you, Chair. What we do see is you'll see from the numbers, obviously, in the data that's there is just the emphasis and focus placed on the treble 9. You know, we do very much perform in a really positive way whenever we look at sort of rest of the UK and wider performance. So I have to say, Police Scotland, we've focused really hard in the CAM update report. Later on, that I'll come to, obviously, where we apply the Thrive model to every call and contact that's given. Obviously, what we want to ensure is that we handle all of the calls in an appropriate way with the right level of risk assessment to inform the best and most appropriate response from Police Scotland. So when we do that, that does take slightly longer for us to complete, but very much the emphasis being on addressing areas of priority. In terms of our 101 service, there has been a slight increase in our average speed of answer. Again, this comes down to the fact of us taking slightly longer to deal with calls. We had a spike earlier in the year of silent treble nines as a result of a new technical feature on some mobile devices that meant that calls were coming in and all of those require to be called back, which takes a minimum of 10 minutes for each call for us to verify. So, but what we also are seeing is that there is a redirection because of our proactive placement of a recorded message on 101, a redirection then for non-emergency contact into your Contact Us email system. So we're trying our best to make as many avenues for contact available that people can make informed choices. But I think certainly in terms of our user satisfaction and the feedback that we get is that actually people across the board do tend to be content. And I think part of it is just being upfront with the information that we provide around expected wait times.
Well, thank you very much for that explanation, and I think it is worth just re-emphasising the multiple channels by which people can make appropriate contact with Police Scotland, and rightly that prioritisation that is given to treble 9 calls, and then through taking that little bit longer to actually properly, assess them using your threat tool, your Thrive tool. So, thank you for that. I think we're really encouraged by this report and the progress that has been made. Everybody wants to move to a preventative model. The less crimes that are committed, the less harm that's out there, and clearly that's something that we're all striving for. And it's not something that Police Scotland does alone, of course, but being able to direct resource into that is helpful, and also improving detection rates is something that we're really looking to see. But to get to these places is making best use of resources and making best use of data, which is what you've drawn out today. So I think the questions that have been asked of you this morning, directed by the members, are around movement to that preventative model, focusing resource to improve detection rates, and that being data driven. So from what I've heard, that is the responses we've received. So I really welcome that, and of course there's never any room for complacency, and I know you're not complacent. So let's continue on this journey of improvement. That's really important, I think, to the public. And, it's part of our responsibility to help drive that. Okay, any final comments or questions on that section? Okay, so thank you to Tom and to everybody that responded to that. I'm now going to move on to the next item in the agenda, which is 2.2, which is the benchmarking progress update. And we've got Nerys Thomas, who's going to speak to this for us. She's a research and practice lead at the College of Policing. And I think, Nerys, we've already alluded to your report and the importance that we're placing upon benchmarking, because what we obviously want to do is get that perspective of well, how well is Police Scotland actually doing and where can they seek improvement. So with that, I'll open up to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I was asked to independently chair a short life working group on how to develop a benchmarking framework for Police Scotland. And I just want to put on the table my thanks to the Police Scotland and Scottish Police Authority team who've been working on this. It's a really complex area. And they've consulted widely and built up some really good links with HMIC FRS in the UK, the National Police Chiefs Council and the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners in trying to identify appropriate data sources for benchmarking and appropriate approaches. So thank you to the team for all the work that they've done in getting us to this point. So this paper marks the completion of the programme of work that's been happening and has fulfilled the key outputs that the Short Life Working Group were there to establish. And I'll just take you very briefly through the elements of the framework that the team have been working on and which is now moving into business as usual and as part of the ongoing performance reporting to the committee and the public, as just referenced actually by Tom. So the group have have delivered a number of outputs which create the framework for benchmarking. And I think these are really important to make sure that we are interpreting the benchmarking data in a way that helps the team to ask questions of performance rather than using it as a way of determining performance in itself. So the group have agreed a set of guiding principles for the benchmarking framework, and in particular the benchmarking should become part of a performance framework and help to stimulate questions rather than being taken as an indicator of performance alone, which I think is really important. And alongside that, they've agreed a set of benchmarking tiers to help establish levels of confidence in the comparisons. We know that some of the data comparisons are not as perfect as one would want, and we know that some of the data sources, both from external organisations like Forces in England and Wales, aren't always strictly comparable with the data from Police Scotland. So we need to be careful with how we are how much confidence we have in that comparison. So we've created a set of tiers that will help people to interpret the confidence that we should have, and also whether the data should be released externally to the public or whether it should just be used for internal decision making. They've also developed a set of most similar groups, forces that can be compared against in particular areas, particularly to ensure the efficiency and the effectiveness of the benchmarking approach and to avoid any perverse behaviours that could be driven from the benchmarking. And so it's trying to allow for benchmarking with similar forces in terms of demographic, economic and social characteristics. And they established those benchmarking most similar groups by drawing on the variables recommended by HMIC FRS and have agreed a group of comparators that will be revisited every 3 years or before if any kind of major revisions are being made to the operating model of the force. So again, that's a really important element, is making sure we're comparing with the right types of organisations. And then they've also set out the measures of progress that they want to benchmark against, and within those, what are the kind of comparative measures that we can use, and identify data sources that we can use to benchmark against those measures. And really importantly, where data isn't available, because there are gaps, I think, in the availability of national data in some of the areas where performance measures or strategic measures of progress have been identified, they are starting to have conversations with forces to see if we can get data on a more bespoke arrangement with those forces. So trying to understand where we have gaps and where we can fill them. And finally, they have set up an approach to how the benchmarking will be described. So notes on comparability, so that we are interpreting the data appropriately and making sure we are not drawing unsound conclusions from the data that the benchmarking is presenting. So all of that work has been done to create a framework which I think will mean that benchmarking is used really well within Police Scotland and can be used in a careful way and a way to prompt further questioning. And it's now been moved into business as usual, led by Police Scotland with the support from the authority staff, and will be reported to this committee on an ongoing basis from now on. So that was just a quick highlight. The detail is in the paper, but again, thanks to the team, I think they've taken a really kind of careful approach to how benchmarking might help with performance measurement in Police Scotland, and I know they're looking to review the process as they progress. So any questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Nerys. Really appreciate the work that's been done, and thank you. And I would echo that acknowledgement of the work done by the team. And you drew out there very specifically that one of the key things that we need to do is use this intelligently to prompt questioning and discussion. So I think that's really important, just to emphasise that. So with that, I'll open up to questions, and the first question I have is from Mary Pitt-Cafley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, this is a really good piece of work, and just wanted to say thank you to the Short Life Working Group for all of the work that's been done on it. It's exactly what we've been looking for, so that's great. But I do think that the point you make about using this information intelligently is very important, but the comparability issue that you highlight in the report, particularly in relation to the lack of consistency between Scotland and England and Wales on crime recording and how crimes are counted, is something we'll have to be aware of all the way through. So to what extent will that be a significant factor as we try to use this, as we wanted to, if we can't be sure that the numbers of crimes are in any way really comparable, if this is a serious issue or something that we can factor in?
Thank you. So I think the team have been doing work to think about how that can be accounted for in the comparisons that they do, and that's where I think the tiers are important. So having kind of confidence in how far these comparisons are really helpful in understanding the performance of Police Scotland. I think it goes back to using the benchmarking to think about where you might want to go and look to understand better where those differences might be coming from, and if actually the differences are coming from different recording practices or other issues that aren't to do with the performance of Police Scotland, then that's fine and that can be parked. But it's helping to show areas where you might want to go and do a little bit more digging and ask a few more questions and understand what might be happening with performance. So I think that's how we can mitigate those slight challenges with comparability.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Nerys. I've got Tina. I don't know if you want to come in and add to that, and then I've got Michelle. So Tina.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, just really to add to the context there. So there was a lot of consideration taken in terms of different legislation, different ways of counting, different crime groupings, etc. So that's all built into the approach in terms of the guiding principles and the tiers as well, so that we can have an idea of how comparable is a specific piece of data, and we would use that in terms of how we would describe that. Some data might be really just looking at broad trends was all we can do with that piece of data, due to if there's a really different way that it's described in legislation, for example, or we might get quite a close comparison if we're able to aggregate some of our crime types to be more similar to those in England and Wales. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and we'll really be continuing to build that as we bring benchmarking forward, so that we're really transparent and clear about how close that comparison is.
Thank you for that, Tina. That's helpful. Mary, you were speaking there, but you were on mute.
Sorry, I was just going to say it sounds like we'll get better at all of this as we go along. So that's helpful. Thank you. Okay,
Michelle.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for this. I'm really encouraged by it. I think I was slightly nervous originally, thinking that there were going to be too many reasons why we couldn't use the benchmarking, because it wasn't, because there was too much variation and so on. So it's encouraging to see that. I absolutely get that there's no point in comparing apples with oranges, but I suppose I think it's going to be really important that we don't allow potential differences to stop us being curious about things, because and so I see the list in the appendix where it says you've got green, orange and red and so on. So and again, I suppose I'm just hoping that the red ones aren't set aside on the basis that there's no point in looking at those, because for all the reasons that are set out in the report and all the cautiousness. So I'm very encouraged, but I just like a little bit of reassurance that the grading isn't about paying less attention to the ones that are more complex and more difficult to compare. because I think the key principle is that this isn't about performance and about driving performance, although ultimately it will be about continuous improvement. But it is about curiosity in terms of, you know, how might we improve? What might we do differently? What questions might we ask to help us, irrespective of what anybody else is doing? So I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but I really appreciate the piece of work.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Nerys wants to come in first on that, but I see Amanda's raised her hand. I'm assuming to respond to Michelle's question.
Yeah, I will let Amanda come in.
Amanda.
Thanks, Nerys. And Michelle, that's a conversation that we've had through the Short Life Working Group. We recognise that it would be easy to default to those metrics where we have a complete data set and we feel comfortable with comparability. But if we are going to use benchmarking to enhance our performance conversation, we need to focus on metrics where there are areas of performance that are either not as strong as we think they should be or where we think there's learning to be had. Across both partial and incomplete data sets, we've continued to work really closely with national bodies. As Nerys said, we've been working through NPCC, APCC and the college, as well as directly with our most similar group forces to access data sets that would allow us to have a bit of confidence that we have enough of a data set there to allow us to compare the metrics that we've identified. It is very much a work in progress. We've got stronger over the last year in terms of what data we have available that we could benchmark against, but it will be something that evolves over time in line with the performance framework and something that we continue to develop and enhance as we can.
Okay, does anybody have any further questions on this? I just finally from me then, you know, really appreciate the work that's been done by the Short Life Working Group. Thank you for taking the time, Nerys, to provide that independent chairing of it. You've clearly got an extremely strong background in this, but as you've mentioned, a strong team that's come together. I think what I'll take away from this is it is an important tool, benchmarking, but it is about helping us to hold Police Scotland to account, yes, but really about improving performance within policing here in Scotland. And it's about prompting questions, and there can be no complacency around any of this, and we'll get better at using it as we go forward. So, you know, thank you again for the work that's been done.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, and Amanda, it's yourself, 2.3, which is the SPA COSLA Police Scotland Partnership Delivery Plan, an update.
Thanks, Chair. Recognising that the paper is read, just a few things to highlight to members of committee. So the partnership agreement between the authority, COSLA and Police Scotland was signed back in 2023, and we've taken probably the last 9 months to develop a delivery plan that allows us to evidence the approach to collaboration across the 4 priorities that were agreed in the partnership agreement. Yeah. We have taken regular direction from the informal forum of COSLA, Police Scotland, the authority and SOLAS to ensure that we are capturing all the work that is underway and that we're being realistic about what can be delivered. It is something that, as we've highlighted in 2.3 in the paper, we'll bring back to this committee on an annual basis to report on progress over the term of the delivery plan. But I'm conscious there are some dates in the plan that have already passed or are soon to be delivered. So I just wanted to highlight a few things. In priority area 1, our local scrutiny webinar takes place next week, and that supports the process to close the final recommendations from the tripartite review of local policing. That's very much a collaborative effort and ties into our strengthening relationship with COSLA under the direction of Councillor Chalmers. We also have a significant amount of public trust and confidence work ongoing, which links to items 3.1 and 3.2 on the agenda, and I'll come back to those as we cover those items. Under priority area 3, we have a significant programme of ongoing work underway in relation to mental health and vulnerability, which builds on the initial conference that the authority held in December 2022, and we'll hear a little bit more about that on agenda item 3.4.5, but happy to take any questions on the detail, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. I will open it up to members to see if there's any questions they have at this stage. Okay, Amanda, we appreciate the time that's been taken, to develop this delivery plan, and we look forward to that continued collaborative approach, and then getting regular updates on how we're delivering against the areas that have been set out within this plan. So thank you for that. 2.4, we move on to the International Development Unit Annual Report, and we have Superintendent June Peebles, who is going to speak to this paper. So over to yourself, June. You're on mute.
You can hear me now? Yeah, good. Sorry, apologies for that technology. So thank you very much for inviting me along here. I won't regurgitate the full content of the report, as I understand you'll have had a chance to read it prior to this meeting, but I will highlight some areas of work that we feel best represents the impact of Police Scotland's participation in international engagement. So since the last update report to this committee, the Police Scotland's international footprint has certainly grown, and it does continue to do so. In short, this has really come about by developing quite strong positive reputation within this field of work with the various agencies and other police services who have worked with us, and really the work has come to us rather than us going to them. So, and I'll talk about that a wee bit later on. So we continue to work to the vision and purpose of the 2021 International Development Strategy. We recognise obviously Scotland as a country as a global contribution within the international community, and that policing obviously plays a key role to this. And all the work that we undertake in IDIU is risk assessed to ensure, amongst other things, that it ties in with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and confirming our role essentially as a good global citizen. So the main piece of work really for the IDIU, the International Development Innovation Unit, is the work that we do alongside the Scottish Government, the Malawi Zambia programme. It's fully funded by the Scottish Government, and essentially it was to develop specialist training to tackle gender-based violence in the two countries, and also child protection. There's also been some work undertaken to develop ICT systems within the police services in Africa as well. So the developments are coordinated through our team, with a process with officers with a desired skill set apply to be involved in the training delivery, and is used very much as a development opportunity for each of the Scottish officers, both professionally and personally, is what we've found. There's an obvious opportunity to share their knowledge and skills and training and mentoring environment, whilst also experiencing that culture and environment, which is vastly different from our own. So the last week actually saw our final deployment for the 23-24 grant funding, which supported 12 deployments to both countries. We've delivered 2 courses, a train the trainer and a sexual offences and child protection course for first line responders. The first course is actually a professional qualification that we offer to the African officers, and that goes some way to support both the police services in Malawi and Zambia to become self-sufficient in delivering the training to their own officers, and hopefully they'll be able to improve those standards that we're looking for. And the second course, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It aims to build skills and confidence to frontline officers dealing with victims who present themselves at police stations, particularly reporting gender-based violence. And you'll see from the report that we undertook a review visit at the end of January to determine the impact that training has been having on both the police officers, but probably more importantly, the victims of crime. So I was part of that review. So I was able to experience firsthand the challenges obviously faced by the police services and victims of gender-based violence. I have a background in gender-based violence, child protection, domestic abuse, so it was a real eye-opener actually to see where we're at. But the reality is that, Scotland's actually only a generation ahead of these countries. It wasn't that long ago where rape within a marriage in Scotland was not against the law, and actually even more recently where domestic abuse was something that happened behind closed doors and wasn't something for the police. So we've got a lot to share with our colleagues in Africa, because we've a path well trodden, as they say. So the current position is Scottish Government have asked us to develop a further 3-year strategy to continue this work. So at the moment, we are writing up a review and developing that strategy. Of course, if money was no object, we'd be able to replicate a lot of the services and the technology that we've got here in Scotland, but ultimately we don't have that sort of funding. So we're focusing again on improvements that we can provide in terms of upskilling the professionals who work with victims in Malawi and Zambia. And the plan certainly to try and draw in strong partnerships for within Scotland and in Africa in terms of the agencies that we work with here in Scotland to share that information. And the feedback for the officers who have been deployed has been overwhelmingly positive in terms of their experience, personal development, but also just that personal experience of being exposed to culture and I suppose countries who are so vastly deprived in comparison to ourselves. So we continue to work with that, and that is our biggest piece of work. The Columbia programme was almost complete the last time we provided an update, and it is indeed now complete. That was a 3-year programme of work that was funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. It ran for 3 years with various topics covered, including again gender mainstreaming, the community-based police prevention, and also transformation of large-scale conflicts with a rights-based approach. Despite the challenges that we had with the programme, the feedback again was resoundingly positive for both the Colombian and the Scottish officers, with quite a powerful experience that they'd all kind of reported back with. I would quite like to highlight the GPX programme, which is the Global Police Innovation Leadership Programme. We've just actually concluded the first year's pilot of this programme. It's designed to create a global network of police leaders, which is essentially equipped with the skills and knowledge and understanding to adapt and respond to emerging issues affecting policing and society across the globe. So Police Scotland have led in collaboration with the Australian Federal Police to create and deliver that programme, and it involves a hybrid method of delivery, online tutorials, Moodle platforms, but also in-person study tours, the last of which was here at the Scottish Police College. So the group work that the participants look into are global challenges to policing. So it allows the participants to build that professional network whilst discussing and developing strategies of how we're going to tackle these issues in the future for policing right across the globe, which again was a highly positive feedback, and we're about to start Pilot 2 in about 2 weeks' time. And actually Tina on the call is one of our participants for the new course. So it's been opened both to police officers and to police staff as well. So just one that we would quite like to highlight. Some of the other collaborations that we have, mostly in Europe, we have a lot of interest coming into us, whereby the IDIU are asked to pull together essentially study weeks. So a lot of German police forces come in. They're particularly interested in the work that we do around de-escalation. We're obviously we're not an armed service, which is an interest to many of our European colleagues, also our American colleagues. And of course, we also have the well-being of the public as a key role description for us, which again is unusual for a lot of our colleagues across the globe. So there's a lot of interest in the work that we do. And so the IDIU, certainly we've got a calendar full of incoming visits to Scotland where we'll share skills and expertise from police officers in Scotland with those colleagues. We've started a Norwegian mentoring collaboration. That's where frontline police officers, so constables, are partnered with colleagues in Norway as a mentoring programme. They do get some accreditation from this. It's a pilot programme, which is absolutely about the development of the skill set of our frontline officers. There's the topics that they do support each other with, is topics like de-escalation, domestic abuse, and there's a review about to take place in April where we're looking to potentially expand that to countries such as Finland and Iceland as well. One of our big pieces of work also that we do as an incoming visit is with the FBI. The FBI are due to return to Scotland in June. They've come to Scotland now for 3 years to do with their National Executive Institute programme. Essentially, this is the FBI's gold standard leadership programme, and Scotland is the only country they come to out with the United States. So impressed they have been with the programme that we pulled together for them. It's their flagship leadership programme, as I say. The FBI programme is really important to us because it actually supports a lot of the other work that we do within the IDIU and allows these outgoing mentoring programmes such as the Norway programme to take place, which supports us in Police Scotland developing our staff and officers. Yeah. And finally, probably just to highlight a really successful collaboration that we've had with the Falkland Islands. We've had two secondees rather to the Falkland Islands, one that's returned now and the other one that's due to end at the end of March, supporting the policing on the Falkland Islands, again driven by the FCDO. The programme or the collaboration with the Falkland Islands has been so successful actually that the Home Office are interested in hearing the collaborative work that we've done with the Falkland Islands, and certainly looking to hold it as a good practice when it comes to twinning with other police forces and police services up and down the UK. So particularly proud of that, and also there's early discussions about potentially Falkland Islands sending some of the probationer constables to Police Scotland, to Tullyallen, to undertake probationer work. So again, that collaboration just continues, built on some of the work that we've done. The capacity of the IDIU is always a challenge in the sense that we could always do more. As I've said to you, this is the work that we've done has come to us. We've not really gone out looking for work, which has been good, but we could always do more potentially if the capacity was increased. I have included in the report some of the financial background to the IDIU, but I think ultimately what is really important for us to make clear is that the work of the IDIU is almost, it's self-funded. Ultimately, the work that the financials that come in from working with the likes of the FBI support the other work that we do, and therefore we essentially balance the sheets, and we reinvest the money back into the officers within Police Scotland for their development and leadership and wider mentoring skills, etc. as well. So ultimately, with a view that we improve their skill set for the people of Scotland. And great. I think that's all I would want to say for you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, June. Highlighting some really important areas of work, drawing out how much commonality there is actually in the world of policing, but where there's difference, and it's interesting to hear that others are interested in those differences like de-escalation and the well-being. And I think it's important that you did point out there that in many ways we're only a generation ahead, in terms of tackling some of these issues around violence against women and girls. And absolutely, we are not there as a country. So with that, can I open it up to members for any questions that they may have? Oh, and then Mary.
Thanks for that, June. And just for clarity, I've got the benefit of sitting on the International Development Board, so I have a bit more knowledge in these areas. One question, June, is the work, and just to commend the work of this unit as well, and issues about value for money, the self-funding investment actually allows us to build talent and capacity within Police Scotland beyond what would be available without this work. So there's a real benefit inwards to Scotland in this work. But looking at that external focus, if you think of the work around gender-based violence in Africa, if you look at supporting officers in other areas of the world, a lot of that is focused at the operational level, rightly so, but actually sustainable change comes from the strategic leadership in these locations as well. Is there any sort of thoughts around how we develop those strategic leadership links as well to back up that work on the ground so that it is sustained?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Tom. We met with a lot of senior officers and middle managers actually in both Zambia and Malawi when we were out there in just the end of January there. they recognise themselves that direction needs to come from them. So we've actually started just at the latter part of that funding gap there, creating spaces for more senior leaders to attend the programme. There was also agreement that over the next 3 years that we would certainly be holding training, the same training. Their ask actually that they get the same training that the frontline officers get in terms of understanding the challenges and the change in direction. So we definitely do have buy-in. We are considering whether actually a reciprocal visit, if they came over to Scotland, might be something that would be useful in terms of seeing how we deal with violence against women and girls in Scotland as well. That's still in debate whether there's value in that or actually whether we run courses. But certainly it's on the cards and it's kind of almost already started, and there is absolutely overwhelming agreement from both Malawi and Zambia that they will participate in the training that we're able to offer as we move forward. So good things hopefully to come.
Okay. Alan, did you want to come in and add to the response that June's just provided to Tom's question?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to give a single illustration of, so the Global Policing Exchange Programme is overseen by Global Exchange Board, which this year and next year Police Scotland, well, myself will chair that. What it brings together, Tom, is about 14, 18 different nations with very senior leaders talking about some of the challenges and dilemmas around policing. So I hosted that board just in February of this year. So that's probably a really good example of, you know, senior leaders from a whole raft of different European and international forces coming together and having a plan of activity over the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you for that. Mary.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much, June, for that report. It's very interesting, and your presentation was also of real interest to the committee. I suppose one of the questions I have is around the mutual benefits that we get from this. So for the officers that we have from Police Scotland who are going and becoming involved in this work, and they bring back some new learning, some new skills, how do we ensure that they use those new skills, that new learning, to positively impact on Police Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback from the officers we have a debrief after every turn, and it's always overwhelmingly positive in terms of the impact that it's actually had on them, and actually gives them a different perspective in terms of when, you know, they deal with domestic violence and gender-based violence all the time here in Scotland, really, but it gives it a completely different perspective. So there is that engagement with the officers that go back then to frontline policing and that then use the skills and the experiences that they've had whilst they've been out in Malawi, Zambia, and the contacts that they've made with the officers in terms of sharing that with both their colleagues, but actually how they deal with the members of the public and the victims who come to them. I think there's an acknowledgement when you return from a country like Malawi of just actually how privileged we are as police officers in terms of what's at our fingertips in terms of support, not just for us, but with our partners, our social work agencies, etc. So ultimately, you know, I think truthfully, my own, there's definitely more personal development that you get from it because it's such impactful stuff. So it is really about trying to make sure that they are using that experience whilst they're back on that front line and considering the different cultures that they've already experienced, and thinking that kind of wider outside the box as they move forward in the policing service. So yeah, all very positive.
Yeah, and hopefully we can create opportunities for them to share that learning and those skills with colleagues as well.
Yeah, actually, one of the officers who'd just been actually wrote a blog and shared it across their division about the experience that she's had and that encouragement for other officers to be involved. So, and that's the type of positivity that we're looking for as well and sharing, as you say. So yeah, really positive.
Ideal. And I think the authority very much supports the strategy and you know, wishes everybody involved in it all the best with it. But I think it's important also that we take account of that when we're devising the new model of policing. So hopefully that will be taken into account. Thank you. Thanks, June.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any further questions? No. You just mentioned that blog there, June. I'm not sure if other members would wish to see it, but if you could share that, I
Yeah.
would be interested
Yeah.
to actually read it.
Yep.
You mentioned the finances. You mentioned work is coming to you. You're not proactively having to seek it. And I know you've provided us with, the headline finances here. But it would be quite interesting in the future to do a little bit of a more detailed financial evaluation in terms of, how much return we're getting for the money that's being spent and is coming back to us. But I just leave that hanging there as something that we might work on for the future.
Okay.
Really, you can tell by the questions, everybody's really interested and supportive of this work. And it is important that Police Scotland plays its part within that global policing system. And this is one of the contributions, but also within an increasingly globalised world. So really important, Mark, really interesting. And thank you for your presentation there today.
No problem. No problem. Thank you. I'll get that blog sent in as well. Thanks very
Lovely.
much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's us now come to the end of section 2, and we're going to move on to section 3, which is the oversight of improvement in policing. But what I'm going to suggest is before we move on to that, we just take a very short 10-minute comfort break. So it's 10 past now, so if we could all return at 20 past. Is that okay for everybody? Okay. in policing, and 3.1, which is the Community Confidence Project update. Amanda, could I ask you to introduce this for us?
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to ask Aidan Curran, who leads on the project, to give detail of progress. But just before I do that, to highlight that this is a regular report to committee, but the ongoing oversight of the project is delivered through the Community Confidence Steering Group, chaired by Mr Halpin on behalf of the authority and attended by partners right across both public and voluntary sector in Scotland to support delivery of the project. But Aidan will give you some highlights from the paper.
Okay, Aidan, over to yourself.
Thank you. So in terms of the key project delivery updates, the project is nearing the end of the fieldwork phase and is on course to conclude this financial year as planned, with the fieldwork complete in 3 out of the 4 localities. So Letham had its final report published in November 23, Irvine, Fullerton and Leavenmouth had their final reports issued in February 24, and Wick is scheduled to conclude on the 28th of March 2024. I won't go into the granular detail attributed to each of the areas, as there's further information available in the update paper submitted today and on the SPA's website. However, I'd just like to note here in this forum that all stages of the engagement cycle from each of the 4 areas have had their insights published and reported on as the work has progressed, and this was to promote values of transparency and participation, which were central to the overall approach of this work. So at a high level, we're beginning to identify and distinguish cross-cutting themes from our analysis in the 4 regions. So, for example, we're developing national insight related to community cohesion and what sorts of factors affect confidence and participation, and new ways of working to promote trust and confidence. We've observed persistent community issues such as antisocial behaviour and drug-related crime, and also evidence the positive impacts of police visibility, participation in prevention and accessibility. We're starting to recognise that the project has potentially quite a wide impact, as there are findings and knowledge which has been generated not only for policing and criminal justice policy practitioners, but also for wider public sector agencies and civil society groups. So in terms of the key project outputs, we're planning a range of products and methods to communicate the insight and knowledge. So this will include an overarching full report for research and policy audiences. We're also looking to produce an accessible infographic-based report aimed at the wider community and non-experts. We're also building a toolkit for local policing, and finally a post-project lessons learned report for local and national stakeholders and community groups keen to carry out similar participatory action research. In January of this year, we had representatives from the Office of the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner visit us to understand our work to date on the project and to take learning to adapt for a similar project that they are running. I think we also have interest from another English PCC office as well, which is already demonstrating the reach and salience of this work. The next project steering group meets on the 18th of March, where the project team will update members on progress and where we're also discussing the structure of the final project reporting. So I'll stop there and hand back to Amanda. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Aidan.
No further comments, Chair. Happy to take questions on the report.
Okay, well, thank you for that. If I could now open it up to members for any questions that they may have at this stage. Tom.
Thanks very much, Aidan, and had the opportunity to meet with the Crime Commissioner's staff from West Midlands, and it was very interesting how there was such commonality in terms of communities within their area and their experiences of the connection with confidence and how it's affected by deprivation, etc. And it's really important we don't fall into the trap of almost stigmatising areas, because these are very strong communities. But even within that, and the work that was ongoing, I think we acknowledged that it was a challenge to get big sample sizes in terms of that engagement, which itself is an indicator, I feel. But just any reflections on how that sample size has affected our confidence and what we can take from the research.
I'll maybe make a start on that one if I can. So you're absolutely right in terms of the community survey that we run at the beginning and end of the project to understand levels of trust and confidence. Response rates for that have been low. I think what we need to recognise is that we're working in very small community areas, and while the sample size is not statistically significant or fully representative of the total community, it is the views of people who have concerns about policing in their local area and are keen to see progress made. I think what has offset that low sample size in a way is the public events and the participative element of the project. So while we've not necessarily had the volume of people come through the door to engage with the project, what we have is people who are really invested and want to have conversations, and quite a lot of individuals who are involved in other groups that are active in their local community. So while they've not come along as a representative of the group, they are able to speak on behalf of groups and to take messages back. Yeah. So I think what we recognise is that without dedicating full-time resource to each of the 4 areas, we weren't going to build the relationships that we want to build, but that's absolutely where local policing divisions come in, and we have seen really positive feedback about that relationship building between the local division and the groups themselves, the individuals who've been interested. And the follow-up work that we do 1 year on from delivery of the project will allow us to understand whether that relationship has been maintained and what difference the ongoing relationship has made to trust and confidence, rather than the specifics of the project.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got a question which it highlights really that within local communities, what they really value is traditional policing. What they really seem to value is that visibility of what people might call the Bobby on the beat. With little awareness of what modern policing is trying to achieve, and the real threats that are out there, in cyberspace and elsewhere, where they're more likely to become victims of crime. I maybe generalising here. So did you get a sense that there's a communication issue, there's a messaging issue out there, there's an understanding issue out there? Did that come through from the people you spoke to?
It absolutely did, and Aidan's far closer to the details, so I'll ask him to give some examples of that. But I think what we really saw was that, as often happens when you do this kind of engagement, regardless of what body you're engaging as, the feedback that we get from participants and residents is, you asked us questions before and then didn't take action, or you didn't tell us what happened, or we don't know what's going on. So there is definitely a communication issue there, but some of that played out in the design of the tests of change. Aidan, you can maybe give some examples of that.
Yeah, so just on that sort of people's idea of traditional policing, I think that's something that we've heard quite a lot across all of the areas. People's sort of desire to go back to sort of like Bobby on the beat style policing. But what another sort of big output of this, which has been delivered across Scotland, sort of mainly led by PPCW colleagues, is a communication piece sort of looking at contemporary policing and policing demands and the policing service, and also the wider public sector landscape and sort of who's responsible for what. So that's kind of a communication presentation that's been developed by PPCW colleagues, and that's kind of been sort of like workshopped in sort of like pre-existing community groups and primary schools and high schools across the country. So that's going to be one of the sort of key tests of change, if you like. As a result of this project, it kind of just takes into account sort of the concerns that was raised, so all the kind of concerns that we received from, so not just the surveys, but also kind of the engagement sessions as well. So we've taken all those kind of concerns and packaged them into this sort of like communication piece that explains to people sort of contemporary sort of the policing landscape. So it's kind of an informative educational piece to allow people to kind of understand what Police Scotland deals with on a day-to-day sort of basis, and also looking into the future as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Mary, see you've raised your hand. Oh, you're on mute.
Apologies for that, Chair. I noticed that there are a number of products from the report, from the work already. And, you know, the reports are aimed at different audiences. There's a practitioner toolkit, which I'm sure is really going to be helpful for local policing. But there's also an internal post-project lessons learned report. So save me the trouble of reading that. What are the most significant lessons learned from this? And Police Scotland could answer it if they'd rather.
So I can maybe make a start again, but Aidan will have far more detail to add on that. I think some of the things that we've identified in the early stages of lessons learned are in part the questions we've already covered about how we get that engagement and how we bring people through the door to ensure it's as representative as possible. I think a big takeaway for us, we recognised when we started this project that it was going to take time and it would probably take longer than we anticipated to get people engaged and to build that level of trust in the project. That's probably been something that's been even more significant than we initially thought. But Aidan, you've got the start of the lessons learned document. Do you want to give some highlights?
Yeah, so there's particular sort of lessons learned around sort of like methods of engagement. So I think initially we were probably teetering on the more sort of like social science, sort of robust, you know, survey methodology, which I think potentially maybe hindered us at the start to a certain extent. Eventually when we sort of like took that sort of learning and sort of that participatory cycle, we became a bit more sort of like flexible on how we engaged with people. So that was probably a big piece of learning. That was something that we heard sort of from community groups, but also members of the public as well. They kind of found we ran sort of like 2 to 3 hour engagement sessions in some areas, and some people just said that was sort of like a really, you know, inaccessible way to kind of like engage with the research. So that was something that we've probably taken into account. But yeah, I probably won't. We've not kind of made the conclusions yet so far, so I wouldn't want to communicate them. But that is something that's going to be produced within the next 3 months. I think that's sort of the time frame for that. But yeah, engagement methods is probably the main lessons learned, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, if there's no more questions, thanks to Amanda, but thank you, Aidan, very much for presenting that to us. I know the project is delivering against the work plan as committed, and we look forward to the toolkits and, you know, further developments on the SRC progress going forward. So thank you very much. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is 3.2, which is public polling. And again, if I could ask Amanda to introduce this for us.
Thanks, Chair. Again, taking the paper as read, just some highlights. So this is the 4th round of public polling that the authority is undertaking, delivered by Diffley Partnership, and Mark is also on the call, and if there are any questions about the process. As we've reported in previous periods, there is an ongoing downward trend in levels of trust and confidence in policing overall. And I think tied to the conversation in the last item and in the performance report at 2.1 on the agenda, we hear concerns about antisocial behaviour coming through in the findings, so that anecdotal level evidence about how people feel living in their communities is very much coming out. The report highlights the work planned for the coming year to undertake a deeper, more qualitative analysis of findings. So Diffley Partnership will support the authority to run workshops which look to understand changes in trust and confidence over time. So what are the factors that impact on either increasing or decreasing trust and confidence, and how could we potentially support Police Scotland to take some action on those things? Very specifically, this round of polling asked some questions about trust and confidence in other public institutions, an ask that was made by this committee the last time polling was discussed, and that shows that overall trust and confidence is higher for other emergency services, ambulance service and fire and rescue, than it is for policing. also higher for the NHS than it is for policing, but not as strong across broad areas of local and national government. So very much in line with other data sources around trust and confidence in public bodies, but helpful, I think, to have the authorities' own understanding of that. And as we say in the paper, there will be a further insight report presented to June committee on the intersectional analysis of the aggregated data across the 4 rounds of polling, and then another round of polling to be considered by committee in September of this year. But Mark and I both available to take questions, Chair.
Thanks for that, Amanda. Mark, can I welcome you to the meeting? It's good to see you again. Is there anything that you would like to add at this stage?
I think Amanda's covered the kind of the highlights of the report, the trend data. I mean, just to say, we will be working closely with Amanda and her team on the qualitative research later on this year, particularly focused on the groups that we have highlighted within the quantitative data as showing lower levels of kind of trust and confidence. So they will be kind of specifically targeted at the sort of societal groups where the survey data has highlighted that need addressed most significantly. So just to make that point, the report as always has the kind of trend from waves, which I hope is helpful. And this time around, obviously, as Amanda says, highlights the positioning of the police service in comparison to other emergency services, which I hope again is useful. But as Amanda said, both she and I are happy to answer any questions should there be any. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. Can I open it up to members? Are there any questions that you want to ask on this report of Amanda or Mark at this point? Okay, oh, sorry, Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to see, isn't it? And it's always disappointing if you see the levels come down. But I suppose the tension for me is where are the wins that are legitimate in terms of delivering the most efficient and effective service that we can, and the extent to which that increases levels of trust and confidence, or to what extent do we end up being so focused on wanting to increase levels of trust and confidence that we divert resources to things that might actually help that, but that may not necessarily keep people the safest or be the most effective or efficient deployment of resources in terms of the general responsibilities of Police Scotland. And again, I don't think I've got a question in there other than, how do we manage that tension, which is not being driven to please everybody to make the numbers go up, if in actual fact what it does is stop us delivering the best service that we can for the resources that we have in terms of people's safety.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michelle. I see that I've got Amanda and then I've got Tom both wanting to come in to respond. So Amanda first.
Thank you. I don't disagree with that concern at all, and it is something that we're quite live to. I think one way that we manage that balance is through the Public Confidence Governance Board and the work on understanding drivers of confidence. I think if we take the previous item on the confidence project, the wider work on understanding drivers of confidence and the Public Confidence Governance Board, that gives us some indications about how practice could be changed overall and improved in terms of being a service delivery model that inspires trust and confidence in policing, rather than a knee-jerk response, as you say, into taking action in areas that are not necessarily priority areas of operational delivery. So it is very much about that balance across the public trust and confidence conversation more generally, and how that ties into the wider performance conversation.
Okay, thanks for that, Amanda. Tom, and then I see that Mark also wants to come in on this. So, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, in response to Michelle's question about striking an appropriate balance, we developed the control strategy on the back of the strategic assessment, and the themes, the priority areas that come from that around areas like serious organised crime, that will be less visible to the public and probably won't inform their view of confidence. Cybercrime, counter-terrorism. That's where actually we use the control strategy to direct resources. But equally, the Chief has said that strengthening public confidence is one of her priority areas. Yeah. So basically, the work that we do takes account of polling, such as the work that SPA colleagues and Mark have driven. But we know that actually, the point you made earlier, Alistair, if there are two broad factors that influence public confidence in policing from the survey work that we've done, it's around visibility and it's around follow-up. So if we can get those bits right, and some of that is about resourcing, but equally it's about culture and it's about the approach that we take to following up and keeping communicating with people effectively about progress and investigations and so on, then we can grow public confidence while getting the right emphasis on areas that are much less visible, but we've identified as the most serious threats, harms and risks. And just the very last point I would make, antisocial behaviour is going to be a feature of all of the local dashboards that we're rolling out across local policing divisions. So we're expecting commanders, and they are, will be taking a close interest in reported levels of ASB and what their detection rates are around it as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Michelle, do you want to come back in there, or do you want to hear what Mark wants to add to the conversation?
Well, just very briefly. So I think that's really helpful, and I think you're right that there is a proportionality. It is important also that we respond to what it is that people think is important, and we do that realistically in terms of the budget we have available. But the other bit, which is, you talked about counter-terrorism and serious and organised, the things that perhaps people don't see as much, that are absolutely critical to their safety. And I just wonder whether an increased visibility around that, either in terms of communication or would help people to understand in the way that we are understanding it here, that perhaps they don't at the moment because we're not telling them about it. So I just wonder whether that's an option as well, really.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that, Michelle. Mark, thanks for your patience.
Okay, thanks very much, Alistair. I suppose I just wanted to make two very brief points, really, just in response to this conversation, which is really helpful. The first one is really helpful because when we do these qualitative sessions, when we do these workshops and that Amanda described earlier, these are exactly the types of conversations that we need to have. What we don't know at the moment is the why this is trending down, and it is trending down. Trust and confidence is trending down as observed by the survey data now over a significant sort of two-year period of time, but we don't know why. So this conversation helps us understand what you kind of want to unpick. So there will be a kind of real laser focus, I think, in those sessions on understanding why it is that people feel the way that they do. So that would be the first point. And the second point, I think, is that this really is about trust and confidence. I think what the data shows is that measures of performance have not declined in the way, or perceptions of performance of the police have not declined in the same way as levels of confidence and trust. In fact, they've stayed relatively stable. This is not necessarily about perceptions of performance, how good a job the police are doing. It is about the confidence and the trust that people have, and that's evidence, and you'll see from the top line document that is appended to the report, question 3, there is actually over a 2-year period of time very little change in perceptions of performance. So there will be an absolute focus, I think, in these sessions on issues of confidence and trust and understanding why people feel the way that they do. So I hope that's helpful in terms of what we see, what the focus of the sessions that are coming up.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Mark. And DCC Spears, Alan, I see you want to come in. It'd be very helpful to hear from a Police Scotland perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and Mark, thanks for the report. It's hugely informative and very kind of thought provoking. I would suggest from the operational policing perspective, it'd be impossible not to look at the report and think a little bit through the lens of vulnerability. and the challenges that's placed upon us to handle and deal with mental health. And I guess the questions there around, visibility, tackling antisocial behaviour, and in some aspects that's preventing crime, which again can be about the visibility of the police. But I think, the demands that's placed on us as a service just now to handle matters of vulnerability, whether it's concern for type calls, whether it's persons going missing, or it's very specifically mental health related, is huge. And I guess looking at the statistics that you've shown in this report, I'm probably less surprised in terms of that, because I think we thrive assessing everything we're handling, and I can see many instances where vulnerability and concern for will be assessed at probably a slightly higher level than maybe what could be an antisocial behaviour related matter. So one of our key focuses is, one, understanding all the data better around mental health, but actually looking at some of the UK lessons learned as to how we would tackle that. I guess a long-winded way of saying, I think part of the answer to the question you're posing there is going to be the time consumed by officers to handle mental health. 650 calls a day. An average incident is at least 4 hours for us to handle, and there's a lot of narrative that is connected to vulnerability within local communities. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, no, thank you, Alan. And I think all of this adds to what is and will be a very informed discussion and debate around how you develop this new model of policing within Scotland. So it's really helpful. And I think I've made this comment before, but since I joined the Scottish Police Authority, I think the thing that struck me most is the comment about police in the UK and in Police Scotland, you police by consent. So that support from the public, that trust from the public, that confidence that they have is so central, to policing. So having these insights and this information is invaluable going forward. Any final questions from anybody on this? No. Well, thanks very much, Mark. Really appreciate you doing this work alongside Amanda and her team, and we look forward to its progression.
Thanks very much, Chair. Nice to see everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we now move on to 3.3, and I see that we've been joined by Jen Cassels, who's the National Sustainability Lead for Police Scotland, and Jen's going to speak to this sustainability, I'm struggling to say that word, sustainability reporting and progress against the environmental strategy. So over to yourself, Jen.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here to just give a very brief overview based on the paper that was submitted to the committee on how we're performing against our environmental strategy, which was launched in 2021. Obviously, I understand that the agenda is very busy and I've been told to be very brief, so I'll take the paper as read. I think the main highlights that come out of this, and I think the main message for the strategy in general, is that we're doing well. And I hope that is apparent from reading the paper. Obviously, we have 3 main aims and focus areas for the strategy. You can see that's our organisation, our people and our partnerships. In terms of our organisation, we're doing well against the overall carbon reduction target that we have aimed to achieve by 2026, and that's a 35% reduction on our baseline year of 2019-20. And you can see in figure 3 that we are on track, in fact, just slightly ahead of track to make that target, which is really good. And obviously, we've provided some explanation as to how we are achieving that. In terms of our people, we have re-established our Green Leaders Network. We have 120 Green Leaders across the organisation who are willing to provide us with information and some of their time voluntarily to help us with implementation of the strategy. We have revamped our Green Zone pages on the intranet, and I think we've raised our profile as a central point of contact for sustainability across the organisation. And then in terms of partnerships, I think this is probably something that we have established right from the very start that we weren't doing, is we are now involving ourselves in a variety of what I would term as communities of practice all over Scotland in relation to developing information and taking part in shared heat schemes, zero carbon heat projects, investigation into hydrogen schemes, and also just upskilling and adding our information and gaining knowledge from key organisations like Sustainable Scotland Network. So it's going very well. I think we also see that the strategy has been a bit of a jumping off point for discussion around adjacent topics such as biodiversity, waste and climate change adaptation, all of which we are now beginning to work on as well. I think underpinning all of that, we have really good data. We've always had good quality data, but I think we're organising ourselves and reporting and using the data in a better way to highlight where we can actually take further action and to evidence the good work that we've done. And indeed, we'll be, again, reporting to the Scottish Government at the end of November on this financial year that's just about to end, and we will be compiling that report from about June or July onwards. And of course, we will provide all of that information to the SPA so that you can see what further good work we've done in relation to the environmental strategy. So I will stop talking now and take any questions that you have.
Yeah. No, thanks very much, Jen. We do appreciate the brevity, but equally, we appreciate that you've drawn out and highlighted some of the key areas of focus. And we have read the report, and as you did say, overall, this is a good news story. Police Scotland are taking this seriously, very seriously. You're on track for that 35% reduction, perhaps slightly ahead. And I think importantly, you highlighted to us as well that, this is a jumping off point for other related issues like biodiversity. So overall, it is really good to get an update. Such an important subject that is so positive. So what I'll do is I'll stop speaking and I'll open it up and see if we have any questions from our colleagues. So over to members. Katarina.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jen, for presenting the report. Just to echo what the Chair's just said, absolutely fantastic progress. Really welcome this update, and it just shows the breadth of activity that Police Scotland are engaged in to kind of get us to where we need to get to. I had a quick question around the electric vehicles activity. So obviously appreciate that, again, progress has been made within that space, and that there is a fleet strategy which was developed in 2019. Now, obviously, we will be sort of 5 years into the strategy. And the target for us is ambitious to kind of get to 100%, if I understand it correctly, electric fleets by 2029. Now, I am conscious that sort of over the last 6 months, really, there have been kind of some media articles around potential manufacturers slowing down, some kind of rental companies, potentially in the US sector, kind of saying, actually, there isn't that much demand for it. And also kind of the UK government position around the delay around net zero. Also kind of, there's been some articles in the press basically saying, the take up of electric vehicles may well be slower, etc. So, and I'm not sure if this is for this committee and for this paper just now. There's indeed a read across into a resources committee potentially with this, but I was wondering if there's going to be a review of our 2019 fleet strategy at some stage to assess, is it still the right thing for us? Are we on the right path? And basically just because we are 5 years into it, we've got a bit more data now. We know how electric vehicles work for us from an operational perspective as well. So sorry, it's a broad question, but I'm just quite conscious how important this kind of part is for our green strategy. So I was wondering if there's any kind of insight into that part that you can give us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it would have been great to have one of our colleagues from Fleet here to answer, because obviously they manage the EV infrastructure programme. I think you're right that we have done well so far, and in talking to our colleagues across the United Kingdom, it's clear that we are way out ahead. I know that it's not a race, Jen, I know that it's not a race, but we are way out ahead in terms of the complement of EV vehicles that we have, as we've said in the paper, almost a third. And and we do have an EV infrastructure programme to back it up. I will be honest, I don't have a lot of the details in terms of how they plan, how the fleet department plans to revamp the fleet strategy or the next phase of EV infrastructure. But what I can certainly do is take that question away to them and try to get a more detailed update of what that might mean and what future plans are. You're absolutely right. It is a very, very important part of our carbon reduction pathway. Looking at the numbers in section 6.2, you can see how much fleet actually contributes to that carbon reduction based on the very marked reduction in diesel consumption across those years from 2019. So I think, with your permission, would it be okay to go to fleet and take that question to them to get a more sort of in-depth response back, rather than me trying to waffle on and approximate what it is that they're actually doing? I think that's probably a better approach. In terms of net zero, you're absolutely right. I think there is a difference between UK targets and Scottish targets. Our targets are slightly ahead of the Westminster targets in that we have to achieve net zero by 2045. Transport is going to be a key issue there, and we're working with the sustainability team and across the CFO portfolio to develop, and I would say that it's probably going to be site by site, but sustainable transport plans that encourage people, not just in terms of low carbon vehicle use, but also out of vehicles, out of individual cars, use of public transport, active travel options, that sort of thing as well. So that's something that we are beginning to look at, probably starting with some of our larger sites.
Thank you for that response, and I see that DCC Spears wants to come in on this as well. So, Alan.
Yeah, thanks, and a good question for Katarina. And I think I can probably give an answer and maybe save Jen some additional work. So the short answer is we are continually reviewing the fleet strategy and having a really close look at it in this current year. You'll know we've invested quite significantly in the volume of electric vehicles within the fleet. So about 25% of our vehicles just now are electric. And we've also had to obviously invest in the charging infrastructure across Scotland. Our perspective would be that we're maybe not seeing the same level of investment across Scotland in other sectors. One of the things that we are doing immediately is rolling out a pilot of using electric vehicles as response vehicles, and we're doing that in 3 or 4 areas across Scotland, and it's a blend of slightly less urban areas, but actually in a couple of our cities. What that will allow us perhaps to do, our intention, Katarina, would be to invest slightly less in the EV infrastructure in the next financial year and look closely at the benefits of piloting those vehicles. So thus far, electric vehicles have been used in this sort of less formal response type roles, and aligned to that, we have to look carefully just at the training and providing us training for officers who are using those vehicles. So the pilot will allow us to do quite a significant assessment of where we are and where we might want to go to, and that will influence the strategy going forward.
Thank you for that. No, that's excellent. That was, I suppose, that was the insight I wanted. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. Any further questions? I've just got one question, Jen. Then it is a really good news story, and I'm just wondering about will it become increasingly difficult to make progress as we go forward? Perhaps you've done the quick wins, and you know, if that's possibly the case, how are we making sure that every initiative that Police Scotland is involved in, and there are many and varied, actually takes proper account of any environmental considerations so we can maintain the great progress that's been made?
I think you're right. I think there are still definitely quick wins out there. A very good example would be LED lighting. We are now at a point with legislation where we are not allowed. We won't have fluorescent lights available for purchase anymore. So replacing to LED, there are great savings to be had. Now the vast majority of our portfolio is still fluorescent lit. Our buildings are still lit with fluorescents. Yeah. So I can see that there are still quick wins there. I think the thing that holds us back from making progress is, as we see across the public sector, is time and resource and money, and that there will always be difficult decisions to be had about where we spend our cash. And obviously I understand it can't always be about sustainability, but you're absolutely right. We're continually reviewing the information that comes into us to understand where we can take that action. I think we are beginning within governance structures to see that decision making has an element of sustainability consideration within it, and not just sustainability for sustainability's sake. I think there's a practical edge to it as well, that people see that sustainability projects tend to cost some money, but save us money, save us time, resource, additional maintenance costs as well. So there's a very good reason for doing it. So I think part of our job is not only to promote projects that reduce those costs, but also to raise the profile of the worthwhileness of sustainability in our governance planning.
Okay, no, that's great. That's answered the question that I had there, Jen, so thank you. Is there any final questions on this paper? No? Okay, thank you for that. We'll move on then to the next item on the agenda. So it's a new section, which is inspections and reviews. And I've had a request here that we slightly alter the order in which we take these, because DCC Beck-Smith has actually got another meeting, I believe, that she has to go to. So if everybody's content with that, yeah, we will start with 3.4.3, which is the first one that I have on my list that DCC Smith was going to be speaking to.
Thank you, Chair. Very grateful, and sorry for the change in the agenda. So I'll present my 3 papers, but obviously we'll pause for questions. But the first one being the HMICS Assurance Review of Domestic Abuse. I'll just pick out a few points from the paper. This is the first update on progress since the plan was presented to the committee in September 23. The tracker is provided at Appendix A, which will give you the in-depth breakdown of all the recommendations and their individual progress. The inspection, as you know, provided 14 recommendations and 13 areas for development, and at this time all remain open and are in the main on track for completion. There's a minor delay in some areas where training is taking longer to complete, and some other dependencies on work streams, which I'll pick up as I go through the paper. We've split the progress into 3 areas: people, process, and information and technology. And I think it's probably fair to say that the people element, the training programs, is one of the most important to get right. And I suppose just wanted to add that although these are recommendations in terms of work that we need to progress, this for me is not about ticking off recommendations. This is about wholesale change and making sure that we embed practice effectively across the organisation. Training is one of those areas that I think it's really important to highlight in terms of the work that's going on across the organisation. It's complex and it hits many different areas, not just within the public protection world, as we would expect. One of the focuses of the report was around probationer training. We were really aligned to the fact that probationer training was quite legislative, and actually we have reviewed through the Public Protection Development Programme probationer training around vulnerability, with a focus on applying practical elements with examples of lived experience and domestic abuse being incorporated, and that is being rolled out from May 2024. We've also created a continuous professional development programme for all officers and staff, and this has involved the creation of 6 modules covering all of the DASA offences, which we know our work is underway around improving our use of DASA, but we think a refreshed training approach is needed in relation to that. We've also renewed our licence for domestic abuse matters training with the College of Policing, and we're just in discussion with LTD around how we roll that out widely across the organisation. And I think, again, really important to highlight that the focus here should be on frontline officers who are responding to vulnerability day in, day out, as opposed to our specialists, which we know have the appropriate training programmes rolled out. We've also worked with C3, and I'm really grateful for C3 support in this. We've added public protection inputs, which will help with the victim and survivor experience at first contact, and also the improvement around Thrive assessments. We are trauma informed in relation to our training, but again, we are making sure this approach is woven into annual operational safety training, tutor constable training, operational command training, and obviously our specialist training around sexual offences liaison officers, FLOs and SIOs, etc. As I say, the new probation training rolls out from May 2024 and is a lot more focused on lived experience and improving vulnerability training for our officers. We've also reviewed our solo cadre. We had a lot of feedback around that in terms of with the gender preferencing, a lot of female solos were being used a lot more than males, as you might imagine. So we've done an EQ HRA in relation to that and made sure that we've got solo coordinators to understand the impact that those deployments are having on officers so that we can be fairer in the way that we're deploying them. We've also, in relation to process, we are understanding our obligation to offer gender preference of interviewing officer, which again, as you might imagine, is very biased towards using women as opposed to male officers. Very grateful for the work in the DPU under Tom's team around making sure that we've got dashboards so we can understand the impact of that moving forward. We've also made improvements to our victim safety planning. We've reviewed all of the guidance and updated the domestic abuse toolkits and all of our CPD modules as well. We've also introduced divisional reviews to check the consistency across local policing areas as well, which I think is really important. In relation to information and technology, we're asking victims for their gender preference around interviews, and our data shows high levels of confidence that this is being complied with. We've also improved mechanisms to gather and monitor survivor feedback, and we're using that to support our work moving forward, which I think is really important. Also, Tina and the team have incorporated those within the VORG dashboard so we can understand the impact of our work on survivors and use those moving forward. And with the full rollout of COS, we're now able to consistently capture and record victim and survivor contact preferences, something which we were unable to do before. As I mentioned, there are areas within the plan that are overlapping in terms of other pieces of work, and those include IT-related work regarding COS and the inquiry module, crossover with the Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Act, DAPS work, which is ongoing, the training, as I mentioned, local policing with diary car crewing appointments and C3 dispatch policy and time limits. And also really important to highlight that the Public Protection Development Programme have taken in all of the recommendations from HMICS, as well as a lot of the wider VORG work, and are using those to develop the new phase of public protection moving forward. I think those were all the areas that I wanted to highlight. As I say, there is a detailed appendix which covers all of the recommendations, and you can ask any questions around that if you wish. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I open this up to members for any questions that they may have at this time? No, I think you've comprehensively covered it for us there, Bex. And what I'm taking from this is that because we've got phase 2 coming up with this, and it's important, of course, that all the improvements that are suggested in the first report are on track, and actually they're having the desired impact. And from what you've described, that's what I've taken from this. But do you have any concerns in this area?
No, I don't, Chair. I guess it's just really important to emphasise, and this is something that I think is really important across the wider violence against women and girls work. What I'm trying to implement is a much broader improvement piece of work as opposed to just targeting the individual recommendations, because I think it's really important that we embed practice across the organisation. So that's something that I'm really keen to do, and phase 2 will help us with that, because that focuses on our internal performance around a lot of this with renewed domestic abuse policies internally, etc. So I welcome that, and I will continue to progress the recommendations moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to move on then to your next paper?
Thank you. So my next paper is update on progress towards HMICS recommendations in respect of policing online child sexual abuse and exploitation. I know this isn't something new to the committee, but just to give you an update in terms of where we're at. So we've discharged 9 recommendations to the satisfaction of HMICS, and those are summarised in Appendix A. There are 2 recommendations which remain outstanding currently, and we've continued work in relation to those. The first one is slightly more complex because it's work alongside COPFS, and it's recommendation 8, which is where we should work with the Crown Office to establish a pragmatic and realistic approach to digital forensic examination requests. We ran a pilot between our digital forensics team and COPFS and its standard forensic instructions, and it was undertaken in the east of the country. This pilot was really important because it evidenced a lot of challenges that we face around process, but also highlighted the benefit of having a single COPFS SPOC. And COPFS have committed to rolling that out across the rest of the country, so we're working with them currently to see how that's going to operate. We also introduced a case management system around dealing with our examination request forms and our backlogs. And digital forensics has done an awful lot of work in relation to that. We've now got an automated management system for our cyber kiosk examination request forms, which has definitely reduced the backlog. So things are moving in a really positive direction. Just in relation to that, we are currently working with COPFS to look at an abbreviated examination policy, which essentially will build in officer safeguards relating to the risk of serious harm posed. We've started initial discussions with COPFS around that, and we need to do some further work with them before we can discharge that recommendation. So we're in dialogue with HMICS just in terms of that. The last recommendation is around ensuring, recommendation 11 is around ensuring that sufficient welfare provision is available and provided to staff working in this area of policing. We know how important this is. This area is a really difficult area of policing to work in. It has a real impact on our officers and staff. So we've rewritten completely the wellbeing policy for our staff within this area. It was taken through our Tackling Online Child Sexual Abuse Gold Group, which I chair. Within that, we've reached out to many different associations and different interested parties to get their views and thoughts, and worked with our officers and staff through a wellbeing group. And underneath that, I wanted to make sure we had a delivery plan to achieve the objective of the wellbeing strategy. I felt it was really important to be able to show all of the different aspects of that, which is being developed, and we'll take that back through the gold strategy. So I'm really confident that we've got a robust approach to dealing with wellbeing in relation to that. As I say, this is something that's really important to me within this area because it is a really difficult area to work in. So we will speak to HMICS once that's been completed around that. I think probably fair to say in this area we've had some real success lately. Our backlog has come down substantially in terms of digital triage, which is a real success. We've improved our risk assessment grading. We're using the KIRAT risk assessment now, which is a much more in-depth risk assessment to understand the risk posed by these particular packages. We've also introduced Operation Overview, which you will know, and since that's been launched, we've had 58 males have been arrested and charged with offences, including grooming. I think also fair to say that some of those nominals that we've charged were previously unidentified in this space, which just shows the value of doing that particular work. Also, just one last point to highlight, the use of technology in this area is really important. You'll know that we're now using CADE facial matching. Our VID officers have gone from being last place in terms of the UK dashboard around uploading images and understanding those to now first. We've got officers that work within that area, and it's a really important area around victim identification. So something that we've really focused on. And just through our Policing in a Digital World programme, the team are working together to understand how we can utilise technology more in this space. In the paper in Appendix 2, there's some tools that we're looking at in terms of moving forward through the Policing in a Digital World programme to be able to support this really worthwhile work and area. So overall, Chair, progress is good. We've got the 2 recommendations to complete. And as I say, again, like I did in my domestic abuse paper, these are really important recommendations, digital triage and wellbeing of officers. So it's something that I want to get right as opposed to keep recommendation. But nothing more from me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you again for that comprehensive overview and emphasising that, you know, the criticality of getting it right on the 2 outstanding recommendations. Can I open it up to members for questions? No, I think everybody's content with the. Oh, sorry, Tom.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was really encouraging, Bex, the update there, and particularly the impact of applying the technology in the area of online sexual exploitation. Are there other? We learned in the last 18 months where we were lagging in the use of technology, and that's been accelerated. We've seen the benefits of that, and really commend the work that's been done there. Are there other areas of potential further use of technology in this that we should be actively considering in terms of improving that?
Tom, absolutely. It's a really good question. I think, interestingly, there's lots of different areas within this that I'm working with. Teams like Dennis Hamill's team, the Policing in a Digital World team, also have good links with the NCA just from previous experience of working in this area myself. And there's a lot I think we could do. It's really encouraging that both the authority and areas like Biometrics Commissioner are really supportive of us doing that. With the rights-based pathway now, we've now got the ability to be able to take that technology through in an ethical way. So I'm really heartened to see that that's something that's going to come to the fore, Tom. Absolutely. It's a really big, important part. If we can use technology such as AI and other areas as well to support our work in this area, it means less officers and staff having to manually do this work as well. It takes the pressure off in terms of wellbeing. It's an awful lot quicker, as you might imagine. So it's definitely something that we're exploring. I had a presentation recently at the Gold Group that I chair around some of the technology that's available in this area and how we can look at moving this forward. So I think it's probably fair to say when as opposed to if, but we'll make sure that this that the board is cited on the work as we progress through that. So thanks for the question, Tom.
Yeah, if you was I right in saying that you identified over 50 men who were not previously known to you? Was that by using the technology?
It was by using UCOL technology, so undercover officers as opposed to actually using the packages that we get to triage. So more of a, I think it's frightening in a way because it shows actually the scale of this that's out there in the UK. And by being able to do that and train officers and staff in that area, we've identified 58 men that we wouldn't have come across traditionally, perhaps in the same way, and probably I would say at an earlier stage than we might have done with a traditional package using an IP address, etc. So I think there's a lot to do in this area, but I think from my perspective, I talked a bit earlier about using data to make demand-led decisions. This is an area that I'm absolutely doing that around understanding the data and seeing what we can do around investment in these particular areas because it is such an important area of work. So yeah. So
if you don't mind, because I just it's a follow on from this directly related. So that is really encouraging, and I commend it, and I'd like to see it accelerated if we can. It also throws up the issues around safeguards, when we're starting to use AI, when we're starting to use authorization levels and accreditation and assurance. So that area of work are you able to give us any sort of assurance around that just now? Because we're getting such a benefit from this that if it was undermined by poor oversight and assurance, then that would be drastic.
No, absolutely, Tom. And our team in Op Overview are governed by the same rules as all of the other UCOL teams that we use. It's extremely strict, the criteria and the scrutiny that's placed around that, and our inspection regime covers that particular area of work, as you would expect. But just in relation to the sort of new technology advances that you raised there, I'm really grateful to Andy and his team around the rights-based pathway work that we've got, where we now have a really firm ethical system in place to triage and bring through that technology for thoughts, discussions, and show that we are being really open and transparent in the use of that. And I'm absolutely understanding of the issues around, facial matching in the UK and other areas. I'm really alive to that with my biometrics portfolio. So I suppose rest assured that we're taking the necessary safeguards in terms of any of the potential use of new technology moving forward. Absolutely.
It may be an area in the future we'd like to look a bit in more detail in terms of that what does that look like in practice. So thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Tom, and thanks for that, Bex. Any final questions on this paper? Oh, you've got one more crime audit, Bex, is it?
I do, yeah, one more. So crime audit, as you'll know, was in 2020. We had recommendations given to us. Now, I've given updates to previous committees in relation to this, and a lot of this was dependent on the rollout of COS. So I'll start from that standpoint, really. As you will know, COS was rolled out and concluded on the 5th of December. And it was, I suppose, fair to say that in the rollout, we noted that crime managers in divisional crime management units would be responsible for assessing and filing all crime reports at the end of their life cycle. This approach under the new COS system didn't reflect legacy arrangements within all the different divisions and all the different crime systems. So as a result, that created crime reports that were migrated over from legacy systems and created large backlogs for the final filing of CRs. Due to the large volume of these CRs and recognising the need to reduce and maintain these going forward, we stood up a gold group, which was chaired by ACC Middleton, and a silver group chaired by DCS Susie Chow. We also included HMICS and SPA, obviously, in relation to that. And I think it's really important to note that this is intrinsically linked to the crime audit work because it will impact in terms of the way that we manage our crime reporting moving forward. So just very briefly, that action plan was developed in 3 stages. The first one was around looking at migrated CR final filing backlogs and coming up with some rules in terms of how we were going to do that, which was done through the Gold Group. The second stage was around examining a consistent crime management final filing business process, looking at opportunities to differentiate between the crime reports which carried lower risk and could be closed by a supervisor, but those would require oversight of the divisional crime management units. And then stage 3, which is where we're at currently, was developing a national crime management process. So looking at a consistent process for crime management, which would ensure not only compliance with SCRS, but it would release capacity within Police Scotland and also make sure that we adhere to the crime recording audit recommendations that were laid down in 2020. So we implemented stage 1 in 2023 and stage 2 has been progressed as well. And stage 3 is underway currently. We've got a short life working group of stakeholders to look at how we manage crime management moving forward. I think important to note as well, we've taken a lot of work through from the UK around benchmarking so we can understand how is this done well across the UK and make sure that we are hitting our compliance targets, reducing demand and increasing capacity. There's been an awful lot of work that's been undertaken in relation to that. We're really grateful to HMICS's support in this regard. They have agreed to give us a revised target date of the 30th of June 2024 around the crime audit recommendations that are outstanding. We're still in the process of testing using data integrity audits by our crime registrars, and actually that's really positive and encouraging in terms of the percentages that we're hitting around that. So I suppose just in summary, we've made progress against each of the 5 open recommendations. They're shown in Appendix A. We will continue to progress with stage 3 around our consistency and compliance in terms of crime recording, and I'm confident that we will be able to hit the revised target date of the 30th of June 2024. But I think importantly, probably above and beyond the HMICS recommendations, actually having a consistent national process for crime recording and integrity audits is something that I think we would all agree is really important, and that's what phase 3 is set to achieve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bex. Open it up to members for questions. No? Well, thank you for that update. I think meeting the revised timeline, June 2024 is important, but that benefit of having that single system across Police Scotland, I think you've drawn that out, the importance of that very well. Okay, thank you. So we'll now go back to the agenda, running order, and I have ACC Emma Bond, who's going to speak to the HMICS Assurance Review of Contact Assessment Model, which was published in September 2022. Emma.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Members will know that this is the 3rd progress report that has been presented to committee on the issue. There's quite a detailed and comprehensive update provided within the papers, which I'll take as read. I suppose just in summary, since the last update to the board, there have been 27 actions closed, 5 of which have enabled 1 recommendation to be progressed for closure, which relates to our core ICT systems. I'm really pleased to say that the target dates, obviously, for any outstanding actions and recommendations still are set for the 1st quarter of the new financial year. So we are optimistic that we'll be able to bring back substantive progress against outstanding actions, albeit I would acknowledge the fact that in terms of some of them, be it around how we deal with mental health, how we deal with local policing appointments, and some of the additional training will have some of the wider constraints that will impact in terms of our ability to make staff available and to be able to undertake some of the wider work. But as I said, recognising the importance, obviously, of the contact assessment model and how we apply the recommendations in terms of direct service delivery to members of the public, as well as being able to effectively prioritise officer attendance and issues around public safety. It's obviously vital for us. So key outstanding recommendations relate to us continuing to improve our data sets, the ongoing training of staff, and, as I've said, development of the resolution team function. And you've heard, obviously, from Beck some of the interdependencies that exist around domestic abuse work, and also to some of the mental health work that's ongoing as outlined in the paper. So good progress since our last update, Chair, and happy to take any questions in terms of anything contained within the report.
Okay, thank you for drawing out these issues and points. I'll open it up to members for any questions that they have. No? Okay, so on track, and all the mitigations where appropriate and interdependencies recognised. So thank you for the update on that. Okay, so we go to 3.4.2, which is the assurance review of hate crime published in June 21. And I welcome Superintendent Shaheen Babar to lead us through this report.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. As you said, I'm Shaheen Babar. I'm now in the Policing Together and Community Wellbeing Unit, formerly known as PPCW. So the paper here for the HMIC Assurance Review of Hate Crime, updated position, quite detailed with the 15 recommendations in Appendix A, with the number of recommendations that are closed, and some have been extended after discussing with HMICS to April. The number of items that have been closed is shown, and timescales have been extended on 4 of the recommendations. The main focus at the moment, obviously, with the recommendations is alongside the implementation on the 1st of April of the Hate Crime and Public Order Act and the work that's going on around that. A key point that's already been mentioned previously by the DCC and the previous ACC is the core operational systems costs, which will assist the hate crime recording and also the data, which is also one of the recommendations. Hate incidents currently will be maintained on our existing vulnerable persons databases until phase 3 of COS is implemented as well. I'll stop there just now to open up for any questions in relation to either the improvement plan or the upcoming hate crime legislation on the 1st of April, to give you that opportunity.
Thank you very much. Open it up to members for any questions that they have on this. So I've got a question that. Are you reassured that the work that's been done in terms of the recommendations that have been delivered, and also the ones that you know have been pushed back slightly, that this will not have any adverse impact on Police Scotland's ability to respond to the new legislation when it's enacted?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. The Hate Crime and Public Order Act programme and the implementation in relation to guidance, training, that's on track. That's over and above any of the recommendations that are ongoing. Some of the recommendations that are being delayed or pushed back are ones that are complex, perhaps technically, or working with Scottish Government, for example, third-party reporting centres reviews. So I'm assured that the hate crime implementation on the 1st of April is on track.
Okay, I appreciate that wider work that's taken place, but also, you know, the specific reassurance that you've given us there. Is there any further questions on this paper, Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Shaheen. The reassurances around the recommendations and that work on track, albeit a note from the paper looking to push some of the dates out because it's beyond control. But it's about the operational readiness as well, and the approach to applying the bill and tackling hate crime. Fundamentally, it's core policing. Is there still thoughts that this requires specialist resources to apply some features of the Act?
No, in essence, the new Hate Crime and Public Order Act brings together a number of existing acts and adds age and variation in sex as an addition. Stirring up hatred was already in existence under race, so it's just been extended. So on an operational sense, I'm quite confident that practically there'll be very little issue is to understand the additional two protected characteristics under hate crime, and also specifically Section 9 of the Act, which is the freedom of expression protection. That is the part that's the addition. But in practice, I don't see any major issues and challenges because the work is really ongoing.
Thanks very much.
Okay, Katerina.
Thank you very much. And my question, I suppose, just kind of follows on from Tom's question, you know, around kind of operational readiness, etc. And you know, something that something that kind of has just been said around, well, it just kind of brings more of the same, but into one legislation, adds a few protected characteristics, etc. How do we ordinarily know whether or not, you know, this piece of legislation is being applied in a proportionate way? I mean, what would be the mechanisms for us, for Police Scotland as a force, to understand that this is obviously a critical bit of legislation, and you know, so how would we know that it is being applied in an appropriate, proportionate way, you know, particularly against kind of the Article 9 that you've just referenced, so freedom of expression? I'm just keen to understand, because obviously, again, this is an area that has been subject to media interest. And there can be some really, really polarizing views as to whether or not, you know, this is something that is kind of benefiting, you know, public kind of confidence in Police Scotland as well. So I'm just really interested to understand, you know, as a police force, how do we monitor the application of that? How do we know what are the metrics that we use to assess whether or not, you know, everything is working as the legislation has intended it, or whether indeed, you know, there is maybe some application of the legislation, you know, again, by our officers, you know, where, you know, we might be saying, okay, actually, it might be going into sort of unintended consequences. So really keen to get your perspective on that.
Thank you for the question. So basically, like in all areas of policing and frontline operational policing, it's all about proportionality and justifying your actions in relation to implementing any legislation. Now, for hate crime specifically, we're always talking about context, evidence corroboration, certain, and I know you may be thinking of this, certain things that are verbally expressed in one set of circumstances may not be assessed as a hate crime, but in another set of circumstances that the same terminology being used can be then assessed as a hate crime or at least a hate incident. The checks and balances are there. The Lord Advocate guidelines have been upgraded or will be upgraded by the 1st of April. We have a set of guidance that have been improved on our internal intranet. Our standing operating procedures is being improved on as well, just to add in the few changes. But practically, as I said, I don't see too many issues. There may be some test cases that will come across us operationally, there will be media interest. We're anticipating that we have a communication strategy alongside the implementation plan. So we are quite ready for potential questions or scrutiny specifically on this legislation. That is part of the training and the guidance that's going out there as well. So at this stage, I'm quite confident that what you're asking, we will have being mindful of that.
Mm-hmm. Chair, can I maybe just follow up on this?
Of course.
You know, because Shaheen, this is music to my ears. You know, it sounds like, you know, a lot of thought went into getting us operationally ready for this. I suppose my question is, you know, because you just quite rightly said, context is incredibly important, and we're effectively asking our frontline officers to be making some potentially quite important decisions around context, potentially in the heat of the moment, you know, potentially afterwards. I suppose, you know, this is, to me, maybe kind of wrongly, but to me, this is an area of kind of policing where context, opinion, feelings, everything kind of comes together, and we're asking our frontline officers to make really, really important decisions. I understand that there's a lot of advocate has provided, you know, guidance, etc. So all that is well and good. But when those decisions are made, you know, I suppose what I am trying to understand is how much visibility do you as, you know, as kind of supervising officers have of whether or not that context and those decisions are being made appropriately? You know, because I understand that the guidance is there, but guidance is only one part of the equation. Somebody needs to check that the guidance is being applied appropriately. And at the moment, you know, I'm trying to wrap my head around, because I come from an audit world, for example, you know, where I would regularly go in and audit decisions that have been made by other groups of people against the standard to give me confidence that actually the decisions they're making are appropriate. In this case, do we have similar mechanisms? And if we don't, then what is our kind of backstop? You know, so how do we know? Is that only if somebody, let's say, is being, you know, if something is recorded as a hate crime or not recorded as a hate crime, that the persons involved complain? Is that kind of the route at which stage we would know whether or not, or, you know, so I'm just trying to understand what is the operational oversight over the decisions that will be made?
Okay, thank you. I see the DCC's hands up. I'll give you a little bit of reassurance on that. Again, like I said, this legislation brings in together a number of legislation that we've been operating already. Everything has to be justified in the actions that police officers take. The checks and balances you're talking about, our frontline supervisors, our sergeants, inspectors would be expected to reassure the officers and also guide them should they need as well. We have our crime managers as well at divisions that would be questioning anything that would be inappropriate, and over and above that, our national Policing Together Equality Diversity team monitor hate crime regularly. And the last example I'll give you for a bit of reassurance, a bit more practical, is as you've known since October 7th, we've had a number of protests every weekend from various sides. Now, that is a very sensitive and emotive set of circumstances. And to date, we've had proportionate and justified recording of hate crimes, and where there's been some allegations made of a hate crime, it has been managed appropriately with, to date, no complaints coming from our engagement with organisations like Friends of Israel or Jewish organisations who we're in touch with regularly, and also, for example, Muslim Council of Scotland or any other organisations as well. That gives me a bit of comfort around the proportionality of actions. And lastly, if somebody does have an issue and they're not content, we do have those checks and balances, including making a complaint against police online to then review what actions have been taken or decisions have been made. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. And DCC Spears, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, and I'll be really quick because Shaheen has covered most of the ground that I was going to cover. But I think in addition to what Shaheen has said, Katerina, we've obviously rolled out core operating systems, which is going to allow us to apply consistency, both in terms of how we record and how we report, and then our performance data will allow us to analyse that. I also think it's really important with the training. That's why we rolled it out up to the rank of Chief Inspector. So we're training area commanders in the same way as we're training frontline officers. So there is no doubt that we will be having a close eye on the introduction of legislation, particularly in the first 12 months.
Okay, I saw your thumb up there, Katerina, so content with the answers that you've received there. Okay, Shaheen, I think we're staying with you now. And we're going to move on to the Assurance Review of Policing Mental Health in Scotland, published October 2023.
Yes, so that's the second paper. Again, that's an update paper in relation to the Mental Health Improvement Plan and the Police Scotland Working Group. Just for your information, currently in Policing Together, our temporary superintendent, Leanne Blacklaw, is now leading on this work. She was a chief inspector within this area of work, so she is well versed on the challenges and the aims and objectives of the improvement plan. The Policing Together executive leads on the improvement plan, and which was approved at the local policing management board on the 25th of January and the senior leadership board on the 7th of February. 14 recommendations, 13 for Police Scotland, and I can take any questions at this stage. If not, there will be further updates as we go forward with the plan.
Okay, thank you for that. Amanda, I see you've raised your hand here.
Thanks, Chair. Just to add a bit of an update on some of the wider mental health work underway. This committee have received previous updates on work around what was initially called mental health vulnerability in policing, but has moved in line with the HMICS review of mental health and policing. So we have a partnership delivery group that is leading on a number of areas of work around the policing response to mental health and the partnership response required to responding to distress in particular. The delivery of this improvement plan is a huge element of that work, but there are wider activities underway, and it's something that we're quite keen to bring back to this committee at next meeting to update on some of that wider mental health work that's underway. It's been a topic of discussion on almost all of the papers discussed by committee today, so something that we're keen to update on and give a bit of discussion time to.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. I'll open it up to members if they have any questions at this stage. No? Okay. Huge area of work that will be hugely impactful as we go forward and look at a revised model for policing within Scotland. And we now have the action plan in place, following up on the HMI inspection stroke review. So we look forward to seeing how that progresses, but that interdependence is not lost, and we'll pick up and get updates on that going forward as well. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, we have one final paper on this section, and I see that Chief Superintendent Pat Campbell has appeared on the screen, and he is going to speak to the joint review of diversion from prosecution, which was published in February 2023.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Yeah, I'll take the report as read. As you see, there are 34 recommendations within the review, 4 for Police Scotland. All 4 recommendations are progressing well as per the paper, and we do not anticipate any barriers to all the recommendations being delivered over the first quarter of the next financial year. I was going to make some brief points that are not in the paper, but to kind of complement some of the work within the paper, if you don't mind, Chair, at this stage. Although we're not obviously a diversionary agency, diversion or alternatives to prosecution is a significant work stream. It sits with ourselves just now within criminal justice under ACC Middleton. And it sits as part of the CJ Transformation Work Plan, which is really progressing at pace at this time. Significant work ongoing with COPFS and the Scottish Court and Tribunal Service around that, weekly meetings at this stage to progress how we can look at some opportunities that presently exist. I think when you look at the present situation where we have the court loadings still excessively high, we post-pandemic, and the impact on citations, the impact on the victim witness experience within the criminal justice system is still not what it should be. When we look from a Police Scotland perspective at what we are looking at putting down through to the court system, roughly we put between 200 and 250 custodies down per day, but only 1 in 7 are actually remanded in custody. So again, we are looking at what we are doing right, the direction we're giving to some of our duty officers and our custody officers round about that wider aspect of that presumption of liberty and round about the thresholds and the Lord Advocate guidelines and areas such as that we're looking at just now. But there is a need just at this time for a wider consideration of some of the diversity opportunities which exist at this stage, and that thereafter falls back to the work we're doing just now around about the development of the new prosecution report. So in November last year, you'll probably be aware, the Crown Agent and DCC Malcolm Graham thereafter sanctioned the review of the new SPR, so the new standard prosecution report. So that basically is a piece of work being carried out, led by myself on behalf of the executive and Jim Brisbane on behalf of Crown. Basically, we are looking at a complete rebuild of the SPR. That has not been reviewed since 2008. So again, the landscape we're presently in just now to where we were in 2008 is completely different. So again, a lot of work, a lot of consultation ongoing around about that. And basically what we are looking to provide Crown in respect of this whole aspect of diversion is the relevant information to make the most effective prosecution as possible. So again, what we are looking at breaking that down into kind of 6 individual work streams, which we've allocated out across both agencies just now, looking at areas such as that whole victim experience, trauma-informed, and that whole more victim-focused approach is one of the areas we're looking at just now, and some of the challenges that brings. But that work's progressing at the moment. There is significant training implications around it, but we are looking to provide an initial report back into the Crown Agent and back into the Executive by the end of May this year, what that new SPR will look like and some of the opportunities that may exist. This is also supported by National Case, as you'll be aware. So again, National Case going live in December last year has provided us with the mechanism and the framework to look at the automation of direct measures. Although it's different from diversion, it gives us that opportunity to automate some of our fixed penalty notices and various other aspects. And again, we've worked ongoing just round about that just now with our national cause team, with the likelihood that we will go live in the first quarter again of the next financial year, which will take a great deal of the SPRs and the reports away from the COPFS and direct back into SCTS and that whole ticket office aspect. So again, a lot of work ongoing. The positive theme obviously coming from SCM round about that early resolution of cases is something we're building on. And again, I'm running and overseeing the SCM aspect for Police Scotland at this time. So again, there are real opportunities round about that early resolution and that diversity aspect by the Justiciary and Crown at that really early stage, and that impact on victims as well is really, really significant that we're finding out. So again, a lot of work ongoing across this whole arena at this particular time, and again with the backdrop of the increasing prison population obviously is very much in our minds as well. But I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, from yourself or from the members.
Yeah, no, thank you, Pat. That was very helpful to add some insights to the paper that we've had presented to us. And with that, what I'll do is I'll open it up to members to see if they have any questions at this stage. Mary.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Thanks very much, Pat. That's a helpful report. You made reference to the need for a comprehensive training programme to be pulled together. Any idea how long it might take to deliver that training to everybody up to inspector grade? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, we've linked in already. There'll be meetings with learning and training division within the force. We've already developed a Moodle package to put out regarding about the wider consideration of what diversity consideration should be taken at this stage. So that's now about to be launched. We've got further work ongoing about the development of a training package for the new SPR. And we are looking to basically impact on the first intake of probationers coming into the force at the start of the new financial year. So again, to hit the probationers at a very, very early stage, so we don't need to repeat that training, but put that message out round about the wider consideration of what now is required for the submission of SPR. So a lot of work ongoing around the whole training arena just now.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any further questions on this? Paul?
Really encouraging in terms of the diversion and getting quick, speedy access to justice, apart from anything else. But it falls down if there's nothing to divert it to. Can you enlighten us in terms of confidence or put plans in place for where those diversion routes are going to be received?
Yeah, so we're working with Crown just now on that. So again, it may well be to look at some of the third sector, to look at other aspects of counselling support for some of the lower level offenders as such. We're already beginning to look at some of the aspect of diversion into the GIP courts, for example, just now, and to take the burden away from the sheriff summary side of things. So again, that threshold we're looking at, looking down into the GIP courts, which are potentially underused at this particular stage. So again, it's wide open around about the routes, and again, round about that support mechanism through the third sector as well. Depending on capacity issues, we're fully aware of the challenges that brings. But as I say, it's really work in progress just now.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that, Pat. That was a very helpful update on an important area in our criminal justice system that is clearly, like so many other parts of the public sector, under pressures. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Chair.
I'll move on then to the next item on the agenda, in the next section, which is the oversight of operational policing matters, and 4.1, which is the North East proportionate response to crime pilot evaluation. And we have ACC Emma Bond and Inspector Andrew Johnson. We're going to speak to this paper.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And as you said, Andrew joins me this morning just to provide a bit of further detail. Obviously, earlier in the year we ran the pilot of the proportionate response to crime work that is part of the Modernising Contact and Engagement programme, which I am the Senior Responsible Officer for. It's a piece of work which actually is not subject to our, as some people have suggested, it is not a policy of non-investigation. This is about Police Scotland remaining fully committed to investigating all matters of crime, and where there are active lines of inquiry, making sure that we can pursue those, but where actually no effective lines of inquiry exist. It's about being transparent with members of the public at the earliest possible opportunity, and ultimately ensuring that officer and staff time is spent in communities or on issues that actually are going to have a much greater impact in terms of the wider safety of communities as a whole. So the pilot, we assess certainly as the evaluation that we'll take you through today, has been a success. There has been positive changes in terms of satisfaction around those directly involved in the pilot, and certainly in terms of that have been encouraging, and also to positive feedback from officers within the divisions who have stated themselves that actually they are finding a greater opportunity to spend time on effective problem solving, on issues that actually need follow-up, and able to dedicate the time that they need, that actually they haven't had prior to the pilot going live. So I fully appreciate constraints of time, but with your permission, Chair, Andrew's going to run through. It's quite a detailed report, and I'm obviously very mindful of the fact it's one that there's quite a significant amount of public interest in. So Andrew's just going to run through some of the key points around the work for you, and then more than happy to take some questions. So if you're content, I'll hand over to Andrew.
No, absolutely. It's important that we get the input from Andrew and a full discussion around this. So Andrew.
Thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen there. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so just to make it clear, the proportionate response to crime process that was implemented or piloted in North East Division is only applicable to direct crime recording. So I'm just going to touch on that firstly. So direct crime recorder, obviously under the contact assessment model, every crime that's reported to Police Scotland is subject to an individual Thrive assessment. So we check the threat, harm, risk, investigate opportunity and vulnerability. Direct crime recording is one of the resolution options available under the contact assessment model. So where a service advisor answers a call and somebody's reporting a crime, they'll carry out that initial Thrive assessment. And really the only types of crimes that end up going to direct crime recorder are ones where there's no outstanding threat because the incident's already happened. There's a low level of harm. There's generally no risk. There's no immediate investigative opportunities that can't wait for later on, and there's no vulnerability. And it's under those circumstances that an initial report would get sent to that resolution option. So just for members' awareness, the direct crime recording is basically where crime reports are recorded remotely over the telephone by the resolution team. And that's generally done by police staff within the resolution team, but also police officers. So it's sort of 80% of them are taken by police staff and 20% by police officers. So last year, approximately 95,000 crime reports were taken by direct crime recording across Police Scotland. However, currently there's no initial investigative assessment made around any proportionate lines of inquiry when those crime reports are taken. So that the crime report's taken, put on the crime system, and every one of those is sent to local policing division with an initial assessment of what, if there are any lines of inquiry, and we're not actually telling the member of the public that when we're speaking to them. What that means is that every one of those 95,000 crime reports currently gets sent to a frontline response officer generally for allocation. And what that can mean for the member of the public is quite often they've phoned up initially to report the crime report. We've called them back at a pre-agreed time to take the crime report from them. And then it can be a number of days or indeed even weeks when a resolution team officer with a big workload gets a chance to phone them back and speak to them. And it's only at that point sometimes that the investigative assessment takes place. And we then tell somebody, unfortunately, there's not any lines of inquiry. So we're trying to move that assessment earlier on in the process. So what is proportionate response to crime? It's basically a process of carrying out an investigative assessment at the time of recording the crime and thereafter recommending the direct filing of crime reports where no proportionate lines of inquiry exist. And it's really important to highlight it's only a recommendation from C3 Division to local policing divisions. And I'll bring that forward. As the ACC said, proportionate response to crime is definitely not a policy of non-investigation of any particular crime type, and every incident is treated on its own merits, as is every crime report is assessed separately. And really important, this is not a new process. So Lothian Borders Police, where I previously worked, Tayside Police, they previously had very similar policies like this in place. Prior to the contact assessment model, we had public assistance desks within control rooms, and they carried out a similar function where crime reports taken by police officers that had no lines of inquiry were not always allocated to the frontline officers. So why do we think proportionate response to crime is important? Well, we're hoping it's going to free up police officers' time to focus on more local policing priorities. It'll provide callers with a clear update on the next steps and the possible outcomes when they first report it to us. Really importantly for me, it creates, manages and demand and enhances officer wellbeing in terms of frontline officers, and it creates a national standard process for assessment of proportionate investigative opportunities within DCR crime reports. I'm just going to talk you through the process now just to show you some of the checks and balances we've got in place for this. So generally what happens, a resolution team assistant will call a caller back at a pre-agreed appointment time. And they will take that crime report on the new national crime system, and that has definitely been an enabler, that having a single crime system for this process. They will then ask a series of investigative questions and assess what investigative opportunities that are available within that crime report, and that's a sort of new aspect to it which doesn't currently take place. And when on the phone with a caller, they will then make a decision whether they believe there's any proportionate lines of inquiry exist. Where proportionate lines of inquiry do exist, the caller will be advised, as they currently are, that the crime report will be sent to the local policing division for allocation. That crime report, including the investigative assessment, is then sent to local policing division with a recommendation that the crime report is allocated. And generally speaking, then a local sergeant will pick that up the next day and allocate it out to a response officer. However, where the resolution team assess that there are no proportionate lines of inquiry within a crime report, they'll advise the caller that the crime report will be sent to local policing for that information and assessment. However, it's unlikely that it will be allocated for investigation at that time. And that's basically so that the member of the public is aware of what's likely to happen, and they're not expecting, they're not waiting days or weeks for a phone call back from the police. That crime report is then sent to local policing division with a recommendation that the crime report is directly filed, and that will also contain the full investigative assessment. So at the local policing division, then this is just a wee overview of the process. So if a crime report's received in by a local policing division with a recommendation that it's directly filed, that crime report is then reviewed by a police officer who works within the crime management unit. They will carry out a further assessment of any investigative opportunities based on their divisional knowledge. So somebody in C3 division covering nationally might not know what's going on in a particular division or a particular initiative. So at any point, a division at that point can make their assessment based on that knowledge. If they disagree and they think there is actually a line of inquiry that should be followed, that crime report is allocated. However, if they agree with the assessment, at that point, that crime report is filed. And pending any further information coming to light. So that's the sort of divisional quality assurance review process in place. We've also got one at local command area as well. So every one of these filed crime reports are fully visible on the new crime system to local area commanders, community policing teams and any local policing officers working in that area, and it's really easy. It's like 3 buttons on a search and it will can bring up any crime report in their area that's been filed. They can then carry out a local assessment of investigative opportunities based on their local knowledge. And again, if they want to investigate that crime report because there's something locally they know it's part of a local trend, or they've heard something in the community that the division won't have known, that they could allocate that crime report. However, alternatively, the crime report, if there's no lines of inquiry, will remain filed pending any new information. We had quite a few good examples in the North East pilot that I could touch on later on, where this process was successful and a crime report that was initially filed was then opened back up through local intelligence that came in and was successfully investigated. So just because the crime report's filed doesn't mean it's filed forever, and we do have situations where a victim might contact the police again with new information, or another witness might come to light and phone us in to say that they've seen something on a Ring doorbell camera, or additional information or stolen property could be recovered. In any of these situations, the crime report will be updated by the resolution team, and a further investigative assessment will take place based on that new information. And the resolution team will decide, does a proportionate line of inquiry now exist based on the new information that's come in, even though that crime report is filed. If it does, we'll basically contact the crime management unit, and that crime report will be allocated out because there's now a line of inquiry. However, if it doesn't, and that could be things like somebody phone up to give a frame number for their bike, or a damage value for property that's been damaged, then the crime report would be updated, but the crime report would remain filed, and so that piece of work and updating that doesn't go to local policing. So in terms of the North East pilot, it ran for 12 weeks between September and November. Every single crime report taken over that 12 weeks by direct crime reporting was quality assured by the CERT team to make sure we're getting a real consistency in terms of decision making. We established an evaluation review group, and strategy, insight and engagement assisted us with survey and frontline officers, resolution team officers and staff, and also members of the public who'd been through the process and been advised that a crime report was being filed. And we also commissioned an independent insight company to run internal and external focus groups, both with police officers and members of the public. Very quickly, just the highlights from the evaluation report then: 472 crime reports during that 12-week period were directly filed, and that equates to about 4.6% of all the crime reports recorded within North East Division over that 12 weeks. And we've estimated that has freed up 2,657 police officer hours. In terms of the impact on police officers, prior to the pilot, 72% of police officers in North East Division said they would regularly be allocated crime reports where no proportionate lines of inquiry existed. However, following the pilot starting, 68% felt they now had a positive difference in their crime report workload, and 56% of police officers felt they now had more time to investigate those crime reports that they do have in their workload that have proportionate lines of inquiry, and focus that time more on that. Since the introduction of the pilot process, public satisfaction rates in the pilot area have risen to 70% in February 2024 from 65% in November last year. And then the figures from our user satisfaction survey in the North East show that 71% of people contacted by the police agree that they've received an appropriate response. And that's the most recent figure, up from 57% in November 2023. I'll pause there, Chair. I do have 3 or 4 example crimes to take members through if you want, but I'm conscious of time, or I can just stop there.
I think if it doesn't take you too long, if you just quickly run through the example crimes and then we can go to questions then.
Yeah, no problem. So these are sort of redacted real crime reports that were taken during the pilot, and it's just to give members an idea of the sort of scenarios that we're talking about here. So in the first one, the caller reported to us that they parked their car in a car park for a period of 6 hours, and on returning that they noticed there was damage to the rear bumper of their car, which appeared to have been caused by another car. No note had been left on the caller's car, and there was no CCTV covering the car park. So that's an offence under Section 170 of the Road Traffic Act. On that instance, the caller was advised that the crime report would be recommended for direct filing because it identified that there was no proportionate lines of inquiry to investigate. On the next example, the caller reported that they returned home to find their house window had been smashed. There'd been nobody at home for 8 hours, and nobody had seen what had happened or when it had happened. The caller and the neighbours did not have any CCTV or Ring doorbell footage. There were no forensic opportunities, and the window had already been repaired by the time the crime was reported to the police. So generally speaking, we would assess that as having no proportionate lines of inquiry. However, as the person reporting the crime was identified as vulnerable, as part of the process, that crime report was still allocated out to a police officer to give them that extra bit of reassurance and a police officer to attend. The third example, the caller reported that they'd not been at home for 4 weeks. When returning home, they'd noticed that 2 ornaments were missing from the front garden. Caller had already spoken to their neighbours and nobody had seen anything. There was no CCTV covering the garden area. And again, the caller was advised at that point that that crime report would be recommended for direct filing. And then the last one, the caller reported that their bag was left unattended for a period of time in a public park. And then returning home, they noticed that the mobile phone was missing from their bag. They were unable to track or trace the phone, leading the caller to believe that someone had picked up the phone and essentially not handed it into the police. There was no CCTV covering the park, and at that point, the caller was advised that the crime report would be recommended for direct filing. However, at a later date, a few days later, the caller recontacted the police to say the phone was now shown a live location. That crime report was reallocated through that process that I showed you earlier on, and following some inquiries, the caller's phone was recovered and the person responsible was traced. So it's just to give you some of the examples during the pilot. And that concludes my run through, Chair.
Oh, thank you for that, Andrew. That's much appreciated. I'll open it up now for members for questions. Tom.
Thank you, Andrew, for your really helpful presentation, particularly the examples, actually, because it brings it to life just exactly what this is about. And as a layperson looking at those examples, I think they're entirely appropriate. But in the same report, the headlines from public reporting of this is painting a much darker picture that, you know, police have given up the fight against crime, the headline sort of thing. And so my question's not so much about the pilot, which is understand sort of proportionate rollout, you know, testing it, measured going forward. But how do we look at our comms strategy around this and maybe tweak that in light of where we are at this time so that it doesn't undermine it? And the public, you know, it's less than 5% of crime reports we're talking here. It's not the majority of business. So it's giving that reassurance to the public in order to maintain that trust and confidence, and actually highlighting the increased satisfaction. So what can we do about the comms strategy?
Thank you for the question. So you're absolutely right, and I think it's probably fair to reflect that there's a range of learning, I think, in terms of just how important something that, from a policing perspective, as Andrew has said, this is, you know, it's not new, it's been done before, but this is about having a national consistent policy and process embedded across the organisation. And I think you're absolutely right, is that the communication and understanding, and we're really conscious of the fact that some people have reported that there has been a view that this is Police Scotland stepping back, and as I say again, it absolutely is not. This is about ensuring that officers' time is spent, that people ultimately get the best service that they can at the earliest opportunity, and that officers' time is well spent dealing with those issues that actually hit at the heart of wider public safety and issues within communities. So for us, obviously, we've undertaken an extensive part of engagement with both key stakeholders such as the Crown Office. We've liaised with colleagues in COSLA. We've obviously seen the presentation to committee today as a vital part of that ongoing wider public engagement and obviously direct accountability. We've obviously done some direct engagement and briefing with the media in terms of trying to ensure that there's a clear narrative and understanding as to what this is. But for us, I suppose we see our divisional commanders as key individuals in terms of that interface that they have with the scrutiny boards at a local level. Obviously, we've had really extensive engagement during the pilot process up in North East Division, and actually there's been really good local support as a result of the engagement done by Graham Mackey, the commander, and others there. And I think that it is that bit of the ongoing conversation, is that recognising that this will not, as we start to roll this out, that actually the engagement doesn't stop, that this is an ongoing process, that our ability to continue through even future reporting to committees provide that degree of assurance in terms of what it is that we are doing, what the pilot rollout has been, hopefully will provide that degree of assurance. As I said, this is about increasing transparency in terms of what police can and can't do, and ultimately the ongoing engagement is a key constituent part of that. So happy to take any further thoughts, certainly from anybody in terms of that, but we see engagement through this committee and certainly scrutiny boards as a key component part of that.
Any further questions? A question from me, in your presentation there, Andrew, you highlighted that I think it was 2,657 police hours. I hesitate to say freed up, but they're available to be used. How can we get reassurance that these will be used in a way that benefits the welfare of officers who are clearly under pressure, and I think that came out, but also will be used to tackle, areas that fall, within that Thrive analysis that require more attention put onto them, so that you can improve detection rates?
Yeah, so sorry, Andrew. I think exactly to your point, Chair. I mean, the expectation is that even through something as simple as our officers been able to avail of a break fee during the day to be able to get that chance to recharge. Obviously, policing is a really challenging and quite often a traumatic and difficult job to do. So the ability for our officers to decompress and be able then to go out and deliver the best service that they can. So I think our own internal staff surveys and that our feedback from our staff associations, such as the Federation and our Supers Association, as well as our staff unions as well, will be vitally important in terms of ensuring as to whether or not we're achieving it. We've even heard earlier on today about the work being done around the SPR within the Criminal Justice Improvement Programme. That time that we've freed up should enable officers to spend time completing their files, their investigations in a more thorough and effective way. The time that they're able to spend to address issues of vulnerability, we should ideally hope to see then in terms of the quality of service, even potentially around our PERC referrals, even in terms of, as you've rightly said, detection rates. Because if we've got officers' time spent attending incidents at an earlier opportunity within that quite often golden hour to secure evidence at an earliest possibility, then we would hope would start to see that benefit of the time saved. And as I said, we'll continue through the work that Tom McMahon and his team have done around our performance reporting to use that to best understand what the benefits of this process are. But this is about, I think, the national process, the consistency, so that whilst fully recognising that first and foremost our primary action is to ensure people are safe, and that where it's necessary and most appropriate, that actually we've got police officers attending and supporting people within their local communities.
And then just one final area from me, it's about, this is a pilot and you're evaluating it, you're learning, lessons where that's appropriate. So you're talking about this potentially rolling out across the whole of Scotland with a phased approach to this and evaluating it as you go. So how will that come to the Scottish Police Authority? Will it come through this committee? What's your thoughts on the governance around that?
Yes, Chair. So the plan would be is that as we look to roll out, that we would follow the same journey almost as the cause rollout took, as Andrew's rightly said, that it has been a key enabler. So we would start in the north divisions, then into the east, and then ultimately into the west. There will be an amount of training and preparatory work that would need to be undertaken for that. So once we get agreement through our own internal governance, more than happy that an update could be brought to this committee in terms of the time frames and planned rollout then, just for visibility. So I don't see that being an issue at all.
Okay, and obviously this will sit within the overall context of that revised model for policing that is currently being developed apace within Police Scotland.
Yes, absolutely. And we see this along with a range of other activity within the organisation as being one part of that wider ability to deliver that revised model. So it's absolutely a key component.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further questions from members? No? Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate that update on this very important piece of work, and something, as you said at the outset, is absolutely in the public interest and in the public's eyes at this moment.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we move on to the final item on today's agenda, which is 4.2, which is Policing in a Digital World Programme Update. And we have ACC Andy Freeburn, who's going to come and speak to this.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair. I'm delighted to present the inaugural Policing in a Digital World annual report. I'll just take a few minutes for some opening comments, and then really happy to move into questions or comments. So I guess we're now 3 years since we launched the Police Scotland Cyber Strategy 2020, and the committee will be aware that considerable amount of time was initially spent on understanding where we should start with this new emerging challenge. So understanding what type of workforce we needed, what our new capabilities should be, where we should focus our spend, and importantly, what the experience of victims were when they are faced with cyber criminality. And this then led to a lot of programme and project work, lots of business cases, various procurement processes. But I'm glad to see that over the last year, we've really turned these aspirations and our strategy into lots of delivery. And you'll see a kind of a plan on page 7 of the report, where we have tried to deliver across a wide variety of component parts that we think are necessary in this space. So critically for policing, at around 3 o'clock on that table, is pursue. So the police will always have a central role in catching the bad guys, trying to bring those to justice that are involved in cyber offending. And we have focused on 3 areas, and DCC Smith has touched on some of these earlier. We focused on online child sexual abuse and exploitation, and we've seen a 511% increase in the last 5 years in this crime. We focused on online fraud, because Scotland now sees around 50 offences per day. And the third area has been about improving our digital forensic capabilities. So we've increased our staff in this area by nearly 30 people. We're seeking ISO accreditation on our processes. And we've also invested in things like digital evidence vans and digital evidence dogs. And I know, I mean, I will mention specifically, Chair, because there's something that gets a lot of public interest in our digital evidence dogs, or as someone has affectionately referred them to them as cyber spaniels, and we will be formally launching that in public later this month. And this is a much needed capability, because when Deputy Smith was talking earlier on, we had a recurring set of circumstances where we were aware that child sexual abuse images were being shared within households, yet police searches under warrant were not locating the devices. And an example, last year, we borrowed a digital evidence dog from North Yorkshire, and that dog then located hidden SD cards with material on them, which led to an arrest and 34 charges. So even something as small as a thumb drive or a phone, which can be secreted in walls or hidden virtually anywhere, these dogs can find them. But you'll see Pursue is only one slice of the whole pie on page 7, Chair. The report includes lots of detail on how we are looking to prevent this type of offending. We will not simply be able to arrest our way out of it. So initiatives such as cyber alarms, cyber choices will all be coming online to help in that prevention space. And clearly, policing can't take this fight alone, and the report talks lots about the partnerships that we have forged with Cyber Scotland, Cyber Fraud Centre, and agencies such as the Scottish Government's SC3, the Cyber Coordination Centre. And this includes partnerships with academia, such as Abertay Cyber Quarter. And I'm very grateful to the SPA for their support through Caroline Stewart in a professional reference group, which assists us in shaping our strategy and provides a great sounding board to check and challenge us. So we're also concluding a piece of work on how we measure our success across these various areas and realise the benefit of these various initiatives. We have an analyst appointed who is assessing categories of effectiveness, efficiency, and the welfare of our officers, and that's running across the financial year, which is just coming to an end. And finally, Chair, you'll see on the picture on page 7, the public are at the very centre of this. Importantly, as we bring in new technologies and capabilities, we want to ensure that we have public trust and confidence. And I'm extremely grateful for the work of this committee in assisting us land the rights-based pathway, which defines the steps and the rigour that we will go to prior to introducing new technologies. And I think that's been one of our greatest collective achievements in the last year, and it gave life to our joint MOU. And we know that we can't be risk averse in this area. We must embrace new technologies, as this will help us keep people safe in the digital world. But we must also be responsible and have the appropriate safeguards and standards and ensure we uphold human rights. Chair, I'll stop at this point and hand back to you for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, much appreciated, Andy, for the introductory comments that you've made there and drawn out some of the highlight areas for what is a comprehensive report. So what I'll do is I'll open it up for questions from members. Oh.
Thanks, Andy. In your report, you reference the investment that's made in the rest of the UK, England, Wales into cryptocurrency investigations, and you are having to negotiate separately in terms of Scotland and the Scottish Government. Could you tell us, give us some reassurance around our capability to be able to tackle this area of investigation?
No, absolutely, and thank you for the question. I mean, so we are seeing, cryptocurrency use, obviously, because it's less trackable, it's more consistent, or it's more desirable for organised criminality. So we do always continue to try and track right across the United Kingdom, because we want the capabilities to be the same. We don't want Scotland to be a kind of a weak part of that. So we did put forward, we need licenses in this area to help us with our cryptocurrency investigation, and that money was provided by Scottish Government. So we were able to purchase those licenses. So we continue to work really closely with NPCC College, with the City of London, to make sure that we're getting all those capabilities as well. And in that case, yes, we were able to get cryptocurrency licenses, thankfully, Tom. So we're now in that space. Yeah. Thank you.
Any further questions? I think you opened up, Andy, by saying that you were really pleased, delighted to bring this report to us today, and it does, and you're right to say that, because it does represent some substantial progress and a growing area, a threat to the public, but equally that there are tools out there if the police use them in that right-based manner that will assist in it. And it does, as you've described, it requires new skill sets coming into policing, into Police Scotland. You're currently developing a new policing model for Scotland, and this is an area, just thinking about fraud as an example, and the almost exponential growth in that. This is an area that requires the right level of investment, a proportionate level of investment against all the other demands. So, what reassurances, can you give us that conversation's taken place and the progress that you've described as this report, can be built on?
No, thank you, Chair. And as you say, I mean, this is not just a bolt-on to Police Scotland. This absolutely needs to sit in the centre. I mean, what we see is every single investigation that Police Scotland are now involved in, there is some form of a digital element to it. There's some sort of a digital footprint. So officers and staff are engaging in this space all the time. And significantly over the next couple of years, our aspiration is that every police officer and member of police staff will have some form of training across cyber, and that will be at 3 different levels. And the organisation is investing in that. I mean, you'll see in the Chief's annual policing plan, again, how we deal with cybercrime, particularly fraud, particularly child sexual abuse, is front and centre. So the programme that I lead, whilst I am in Specialist Crime Division, it cuts right across the organisation. This isn't just about capabilities within crime, it's right across our organisation.
Yeah, and another question that comes to me as well, and earlier in one of the papers, we've got this value that the public place on more traditional forms of policing, and that visibility, but much of the vulnerability that they have here in digital space is not seen by them necessarily, and therefore perhaps is not valued unless you become a victim of it. So how much work, what responsibility do you see Police Scotland having in helping to, inform and support people to understand these vulnerabilities, and then therefore make some of the tools that are available, more acceptable, and protecting all their rights and addressing the concerns that they may have?
No, it's a really good question, Chair, because, as you're alluding to, the officers and staff that we need in this space aren't ones that will put on yellow coats and be out visible in the community. They will be sitting in police stations in benches behind computer screens and investigating that way. But absolutely, this is, fraud. Online fraud is one of the burgeoning crimes that we see. Child sexual abuse, burgeoning crime again. And the public don't see those resources. So, I mean, what we are trying to do is continue to engage with the public on this. So this year, we have a number of different articles where I have basically offered myself to local journalists to say, look, could you please run a story on this? I'm pleased to say many of them have picked that up. And we've had some good exclusives running just on the threats of in the cyberspace. But it is going to be a constant challenge, and as I've said, it's not one that policing can defeat by itself. We need the public to know about this so that they can protect and prevent this occurring at source.
Okay, much appreciated. Thank you for the answers on that and your insights. Does anybody have any final questions for ACC Freeburn? No, that's it. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your update and look forward to further ones in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's us come to the end of today's agenda. Any final comments, observations from anybody? No? Okay, well, thank you all very much for your participation today, and thank you very much to everybody that's clearly spent so much time in preparing today's papers that gives us real insight into the very complex and challenging world that Police Scotland operate within. And it's good to hear about the successes, but equally it is a journey of continuous improvement. So it's good to recognise the areas that require more focus as well. So thanks to everybody for today.